TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 10.
Good morning, I'm Kate Partridge. The first day of an 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port is underway. Unite members at Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out in a dispute over pay. A port source claims the action will be an inconvenience, not a catastrophe, a point echoed by the CEO of the UK Major Ports Group, Tim Morris.
There will inevitably be an impact from what's happening at Felixstowe. It'll be very interesting to see over the next couple of days whether it translates into being an inconvenience or actually more significant disruption, as it would have done perhaps 2 years ago before we were used to working in this much more flexible way. So a very interesting time for this to be happening.
Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association are being asked to vote on an indefinite, uninterrupted strike that would start on September the 5th. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng says, in his words, that help is coming for people who'll struggle with their energy bills this year. He says work is underway on a package of measures, but gave no details. University bosses are calling for tuition fees to be raised closer to the £24,000 a year average that foreign students pay. They warn the current annual fee of £9,250 for UK students is forcing them to take on an ever-increasing number of foreign applicants. A record 1 in 5 undergraduates starting at top universities this autumn are from overseas, up by 7% in a year. Former Education Minister Joe Johnson explained to Times Radio the role international students play.
This is a real misunderstanding of the role that international students play in our system. They cross-subsidise domestic students and they make possible the provision of courses that would be loss-making and wouldn't otherwise be offered.
The police watchdog is investigating Scotland Yard after it emerged police met missing student nurse Awami Davis. Officers spoke to her on July the 6th after being called to an address in Croydon, hours after Essex police were told she'd disappeared. And the President of Ukraine has congratulated Alexander Usyk on his victory over British boxer Anthony Joshua, saying it symbolises that Ukrainians won't give up. Usyk won on a split decision after the pair went the full 12 rounds, retaining his heavyweight titles in Saudi Arabia. After the judge's decision was declared, Joshua threw 2 of the title belts before storming out of the ring, but later congratulated his opponent.
Very, very, very upset. But I've got to give the man his credit because he's done well. It takes a lot to come up in weight, challenge, win the belt, defend the belt. He's good. He's really, really good.
Now, the weather.
Times World News sponsors Talk TV Weather.
This morning, much of the country will get off to a dry and bright start, but a scattering of showers will develop, with some thicker cloud arriving into the southwest. Taking a closer look at lunchtime, and Scotland will have a much better day than yesterday, with a mixture of sunny spells and a few showers. Winds will also be lighter here than yesterday. Northern Ireland and Northern England will have a largely dry lunchtime, and it's here where we are most likely to see the best of the sunshine. Further south, and we're likely to see a mix of sunny spells and showers for many, but South Wales and South West England will have an increasingly grey and damp afternoon as a weather system moves in. Well, despite the cloud, it will feel increasingly humid here. The cloud and rain will move a little further northeast this afternoon, but for many, it will remain dry.
Times World News sponsors Talk TV Weather.
I think the topic that I'd like more people to be thinking about is definitely health and social care. You know, we have an outrageous system where we don't look after our elderly in the way we should. We've got to have a proper grown-up and honest conversation about that.
Well, a very good morning to you. Cardi P here, Peter Cardwell, between now and 1 o'clock. Richard Tice is taking a well-deserved holiday, so I'm in this Sunday morning between 10 and 1. And we have a real live member of the Shadow Front Bench in the studio. Peter Kyle is here, the Shadow Northern Ireland Secretary. We're going to be asking him about Labour's plans to try to recall Parliament and deal with the price cap, which is something that is probably due to go up on Friday. We don't know that, but energy bills are going up to such an extent that so many people, all sorts of viewers and listeners getting in touch saying that they're just too high already. How can we prevent them going higher? Well, let's hear from Labour. Let's hear what their plan is for that. We're also going live to Afghanistan to talk to someone there who was a translator for British and American forces there. He was left behind with his family. He's in fear of his life from the Taliban. We're going to be talking to him a little bit later on. Also, the price of school uniforms. A principal, a head teacher in Belfast, has slightly dropped the ball, I think, by saying that parents should not go to cheap retailers and should not go to supermarkets. In Wales, for example, you've got to have a school uniform that is available in a supermarket. So what should the rules be? What are you paying for your children's school uniforms if they're in secondary school, for example, or a school that has a school uniform? I heard this week of one blazer costing £150. We're in a cost of living crisis. Surely children's clothes can be less expensive. There's loads more in this programme as well. We'll be talking about whether IRA violence was unavoidable. That's what the leader of Sinn Féin and the de facto First Minister of Northern Ireland has said. We'll be talking about that. We'll have a newspaper review. We'll be talking about Ukrainian strikes on Crimea. And, of course, we will have our hugely popular new feature, Cat of the Week. Anyway, from the ridiculous to the sublime, Peter Kyle is here. He is the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Labour front bencher. It's lovely to see you in the studio. How are you doing?
It's great to be here, Peter. Thanks for having me.
There's a big policy that Labour has announced. Labour's often been criticised for not having enough policies, but you definitely have one now, and you're saying that Parliament should be recalled, and you're also saying that Sir Keir Starmer has a radical plan that should answer, or at least attempt to answer, the cost of living crisis in regard to energy, because the price cap could well go up again on Friday. What's your plan, and why do you think it will work?
Well, the plan is that we want to make sure the price cap is kept at today's levels. We know it's going to go up on Friday. That's inevitable. So we want it held at the current levels. The way we need to do that is to get Parliament back tomorrow. So tomorrow isn't a policy. Tomorrow is just a necessity to get Parliament back so that we can legislate.
Do you think that's realistic?
It is. I mean, we're in an emergency.
But is I absolutely agree with you that we're in an emergency. But will the government listen to you? Can you see really at 2:30 today the MPs going back to Parliament?
Of course I can't see it. I can't see the Tories doing it, because the Tories have been absolutely absent all the way through summer. The idea that they're going to be absent all the way through summer, that they're going to let go of our economy in the way they have, because the fundamentals of our economy have been let loose so wildly. The idea that they're going to get back to implement a Labour plan, I can't see happening. But Labour does have a plan. Economists, including the Institute of Fiscal Studies, have endorsed the plan in saying that it is credible, it is fully costed, and it is implementable. They also agree with us that actually it would reduce inflation by 4%. So this is a plan to keep the energy levels at the price they are now, so nobody would pay a penny more throughout winter. We would fund it by having a backdated windfall tax on the gas and oil producers in the North Sea, coupled with the savings that we would make from the drop in inflation, which would mean that we don't have to pay so much in our debt payment. And we would wrap in the £14 billion that's already been announced by government into a plan that keeps the energy levels low. We would also make sure that people on prepayment meters would pay the same price as those on direct debit.
They're often paying more on average at the moment, aren't they?
That's right. So that would get an extra £300 possibly into the pockets of people who are on the lowest of incomes. And, of course, we'd have a temporary suspension of VAT on energy costs over the winter. So these are things that would actually get a real grip on the immediate challenge, and then we can get onto the long-term plans for energy sustainability and also getting growth back into our economy, which is our major, singular, long-term objective for government.
Liz Truss is, let's face it, probably going to be the next Prime Minister. We don't know that for sure, but it certainly looks that way. She says that tax cuts will stimulate growth. Do you agree with her?
Well, you can see that this government has cut corporation tax radically in the last 12 years, and yet we've had the lowest growth of government and in
so you
Britain.
don't support tax cuts?
No, what we do support is lowering the tax burden on workers, but it needs to be done in a strategic way and in an affordable way. We need to be responsible with
what is
public
that way?
money.
Tell us how that would work.
Well, for example, we want a tax cut that would be a temporary suspension of VAT on energy bills. That is a focused tax cut that puts money into people who need it the most and addresses the immediate concern that's before the country right now for the next 6 months to a year. So we would do that. What we don't want to do is take taxes ideologically away that would benefit the rich more than the poor, but wouldn't be focused on growth. We want to make sure that every single penny of taxpayers' money is focused on getting growth into our economy. We know from the tax cuts that they've made in the past that they haven't focused it on growth. We also know that there's been 15 tax rises by Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss in recent years. So the idea that they are tax-cutting Tories is absolutely beyond comprehension. But singularly, Peter, let me just... I'm sorry, you've been very generous to me. They don't have a plan. The Labour Party has a plan that's costed and it is implementable. It is ready to go. If Parliament comes back tomorrow, we can make sure this is done before the energy price cap is raised on Friday. The Tories don't have a plan, but even worse, you've got a Prime Minister, 2 prime ministerial candidates who will become the Prime Minister in the next fortnight, and neither of them can get together and get a plan between them that they can agree on. The Tory party is ungovernable and they are incapable of governing.
That's something that one of our texters disagrees with. He says Labour's plan is once again fantasy, magic, money tree policy, political points only. Anything they can do to poke at the government, they will do. Well, you oppose the government, I think that's probably fair enough. COVID and Brexit proved that. Maybe you'll reply to that in a second, but one question I want to ask you about, and this is something that Talk TV viewers and listeners ask us all the time. They're looking at their energy bills and they see this, what some people call the green levy, and they think, why are we paying more money to go from our hard-earned money to go to green energy for that investment? Why can't the companies themselves put their huge profits into investing in green energy? Why do we as taxpayers have to pay that? Do you support the green levy?
I do support the green levy, but let's be very clear that scrapping the green levy wouldn't even touch the sides when it comes to the challenge, the economic challenge that most Britons face at the moment. Scrapping it would save about...
It's a sixth of some people's energy bills.
It would save about £100 to £150 for some over the course of a year. Now, most people are going to be facing an increase of £3,000 to £4,000. So don't pretend that that's how we solve this problem. And secondly, we are going to need to have a partnership between all sectors in order to get the economy to where it needs to be. The Labour Party does have a plan for energy security, and that's a long-term plan, but it means doubling our offshore and our onshore energy. It means insulating 18 million homes, and crucially, it means having sustainable, domestically produced energy. So the problem we've got with your texter and the idea and the point you're putting to me is that if we don't make this transition quickly, we will be reliant on gas and oil for longer, which means we are increasingly dependent on foreign suppliers. We do export gas, but we import more than we export. It's a very complex market. The only way we can solve this problem into the long term is to have sustainable, domestically produced energy, and hopefully we can become an exporter and not a net importer of this energy into the future. We can only do that by investing in a very, very large and sustained way. That's why the Labour Party has a green investment pledge, which is a £28 billion multi-year programme, which would invest in the capital needed to retool our economy, and primarily that means greening our energy production and creating loads of really highly skilled jobs in the process. This is about getting our economy plus decarbonising our economy and country into the future.
Just one more point I want to put you from another texter. This is Jane, who, listen, I should say I have defended politicians taking holidays. I absolutely think Keir Starmer should have spent time with his family. I think anybody who's churlish about that needs to shut up and sit down. But one person who's been in touch says, we have been discussing, sorry, I just lost it there. We've been discussing this on your show for months in terms of the cost of living crisis. Why didn't Labour suggest no recess? Many listeners did. Why a recall now? This has been going on for some time.
Well, I mean, we put forward our plan back in January for the windfall tax. We had a plan over a year ago to start the insulation programme for homes. If we'd started insulating when the Labour Party called for it and presented our plan for warmer homes, then 1 million homes would have been insulated in that 12 months. You know, had they done the windfall tax at the time we paid for it, we would have had enough money to start contributing towards the holding down of the hike in the energy cap. So we have had the plans whilst Parliament has been in session. The problem isn't actually parliamentary recess. The problem is having a governing party with the ideas, the people and the policies that are ready to go. And
so
that takes us to your first...
Why call for a recall of Parliament then?
Because the energy price cap is going to be released on Friday.
But you knew that?
No, well, we were calling for these things to happen before recess. Now, we've been developing the plan because the crisis has been unfolding. There's been 2 predicted hikes in the amount of the amount that people are going to be paying in their energy costs just over the summer. So the nature of the challenge facing consumers in Britain has actually evolved over the summer. So some of the things that we've been calling for, we've called for in the past, but the rest of it we've been developing over the summer. The Labour Party as individuals, yes, we take a few days holiday, but we've been working our absolute socks off. To go to your first caller's point about the Labour Party having policies that are ready to go and implementable and whether they're credible or not, the Institute, the IFS, the Institute of Fiscal Studies has said that our policy, it is sound. It is economically...
They are the most respected economists in the country.
That's correct.
So, yeah.
And it is economically sound. It is implementable and it's ready to go. Compare that to the government. They have been in for 12 years. They don't even have a plan that's here that you can get your teeth into.
Yeah,
economists can't even look at what the Tories are proposing.
You're absolutely right, and I think, there is a zombie government at the moment. There's no doubt about that. Peter, I just have you for a few more minutes, and I know you're Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
Shadow.
Shadow
I'm aiming to be Secretary of State.
Shadow Secretary of State for... That's a little echo of when Mo Mowlam, I don't know if you remember, when she was appointed after 1997, and they said, what job have you been given? And she said, I've been given Shadow Secretary of State for... Oh no, actually, I'm now the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Anyway, it's a very funny clip. She was a great woman who did great things. There's been an opinion poll for the Belfast Telegraph, which says that 69... We're going to be discussing this in the programme later on. 69% of those in nationalist and Republican communities believe that violent resistance to British rule during the Troubles was the only option. This is after Michelle O'Neill, who's the Northern Ireland leader of Sinn Féin, has said in an interview, I think at the time, this is at the Troubles, I think at the time there was no alternative, but now thankfully we have an alternative to conflict. That's the Good Friday Agreement. Do you believe there was no alternative to the IRA murdering people?
Of course I don't. No, I don't believe that for a second. And the proof is actually there for us, and that was in 1998, and it was the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. The fact that we could deliver it in 1998 begs the question, why wasn't it possible to deliver it before? Now, we can debate the reasons why we couldn't deliver it before, but the very fact it exists shows that it was possible then, and I believe if we'd had the statescraft and the statespeople earlier, we could have delivered it earlier.
Someone called the Sunningdale for slow learners, the Sunningdale Agreement in 1972. I wonder, I mean, presumably, if Labour want to win big in 2024, if there's an election that year rather than 2023, if Labour want to win, they've got to win Scotland. I think you've got to do well in Scotland. I think you would probably agree. Presumably, if there was a referendum, a second referendum in Scotland, you'd be campaigning for the union to remain.
What we want to do is make sure that the union works. That's our primary focus. If we win an election, we want to make sure that Westminster is a place that people want to aspire to do business in. At the moment, because we have only one parliament in the UK and Northern Ireland, which has voted to lower standards, which has broken the ministerial code, where people routinely lower the standards and break the rules and do so with impunity. Westminster has looked pretty repulsive. So this talk about border polls and...
But you're against Scottish independence. You're definitely against Scottish independence. Hold on. OK, so you know where this is going, Peter.
Yeah.
So if there's a poll for a united Ireland, would you campaign for Northern Ireland to remain within the UK?
There is a very different set of circumstances, and it's really important to underline that between what's in Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland and Scotland. Not least the history in the two places, but also not least the fact that there is an international treaty of which the UK government is a signatory, which spells out all of the conditions for a border poll and the way that parties in Westminster have to act should there one be called. The Labour Party respects its international treaties, unlike the Tory Party, but we will adhere to the letter and the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement.
So are you not a unionist?
I believe that the way to save the union, I believe the union is a force for good in all parts of the...
So you are a unionist?
I believe the union is a force for good within all constituent parts of the union, and it's a force for good collectively around the world. The way to save the union is to make Westminster work, make it deliver, and make it a place that people want to aspire to come and do business in and solve problems in, not as we currently have, somewhere that looks pretty repulsive. Because the people who are running the place have made it repulsive achieved by breaking the rules and lowering the standards. So we will save the union, and we'll do it by making it a place that works for all parts of the union and is a place that people want to aspire to come to solve the problems we have as a country.
OK, Peter Kyle, Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. I've given you some tough questions. You've answered them all with great clarity. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio this morning. Thank you. Well, that was a good start to the show. Peter Kyle, Labour frontbencher, huge reaction. Lots of people giving us a call. Lots of people texting in. I didn't even give you the text number. It's 87222. And if you want to text, be sure to put the word talk in your text so it comes through on the screen in front of me. And thanks very much to everybody who's called as well. We'll take your calls a bit later. 0344 499 1000. But what happens is you ring in, Mosaic takes what your point, and then there's a list of them, and then we take as many calls as we can throughout the programme. So the earlier you get on your call, the more likely you are to be on air, because we try to take as many people as possible, but obviously we can't take everybody. So 0344 499 1000. Dan from Kent says, morning Peter, can you ask Peter Kyle if he supports fracking? Sorry, I can't, because he's gone to another interview. Peter, what is Peter Kyle's solution to providing sustainable energy? I don't think wind is the solution, just like at Germany, who have 64 gigawatts of wind generation. It's not reliable, says Tim in Southampton. The Hanged Man says, your Labour representative says the green levy is a small amount. I would rather have the 100 to 150 pounds in my pocket. His argument, I suppose, was that you may have that money in your pocket, but at the same time, if we don't invest in green energy now, then our bills are going to go up even further. That's Peter Kyle's argument, I should say, not my argument. Leo has been in touch to say, very good morning, Peter. The energy companies better be careful. The more the public see how much their profits go up, the more credibility the nationalisation argument becomes. Then again, is it possible the state would be more efficient and stop customers being ripped off? Well, that's a big question, Leo, and it's a really, really good point to raise. Peter, why can't we have a referendum on net zero? If you have to be forced to do something in a democracy that will be detrimental to you, then no longer living in a free society, says Jackie. Thank you very much indeed for that. Fake news again from Labour, says one tweeter. No way you can insulate 1 million homes in 12 months. Great show, says George of Croydon. Thank you very much indeed. And on the school uniforms item that we're just about to discuss, school uniforms are another way for academy chains to extract money from parents. Companies should not make a profit from children's education, says Brexit Duck. Thank you very much indeed for that. And that is the topic we're going to discuss now with Grania Hallahan, who is a senior analyst at TES, the Times Education Supplement, because a school head teacher in Belfast has, I think, dropped a massive clanger by saying that children should not be, or parents should not be buying school uniforms for their children from cheap shops, because she says it's a false economy. You buy a cheap uniform and then you've got to replace it and replace it and replace it. It would be better if you just put the money and spent the money outline at the start. But it's interesting, I was talking to a parent in Northern Ireland actually recently who said that her daughter's blazer was going to cost £150 for a blazer, for a jacket. I mean, for goodness sake, how much do they cost in Primark or in Asda? I mean, I just think that we should follow the Welsh policy, which is that all school uniforms should be available to buy in a supermarket for a reasonable amount of money. I mean, parents are paying huge amounts of money. That parent I was talking to as well said there were leggings, just literally throw them on for a bit of hockey. Her daughter, you throw them on for a bit of hockey. £26 for a pair of leggings. I'm sure you could get for £2 or £3 in Primark or Asda or somewhere like that. Grania Hallahan is the senior analyst at the Times Education Supplement, one of the foremost commentators on education in this country. Grania, absolute pleasure to have you on the programme. How are you doing?
Hello, good morning. I think you give me heart palpitations with those prices. I feel quite unwell.
It's crazy, isn't it?
I've got 3 daughters who are all in school, and you know, this time of year, I think I and like lots of families and lots of parents at the moment, we're thinking, right, uniform, got to get uniform sorted for the new school year.
Especially with the results coming out and so on, it's kind of like, well, with sixth formers and so on, you know kind of where they're going at this time of the year and so on. So yeah, this is the big time. But if you have 3 daughters, and especially if you've got, I mean, maybe people have more kids than that. I mean, it's a pricey time of the year, isn't it?
And I'm really fortunate in that my daughters can all share their school uniform, we can do hand-me-downs, but you've got large families with different gender siblings, then you get into quite a difficult situation of having to buy the girls' uniform, buy the boys' uniform. And this point was actually picked up in the Department for Education did the survey, and it was run by someone called Francesca Mullin, and it's Let Clothes Be Clothes. And they compared the cost of uniform for boys versus girls, and they found that of the 40 schools that they surveyed, it was much more common for the girls' uniform to be more expensive. In 70% of those schools, the girls' uniform was more expensive. And in one school, it was double the cost.
Double the cost for a girl than a boy. That's crazy.
And it's because you've got all these extra little bits. You've got the cardigan, you've got the skirt, and you've got the, you know, it's all the extra add-ons.
So tell me what they do in Wales, because I don't know if I gave exactly the right kind of description there, because this is a policy of the Welsh government, which is, let's remember, a Labour government. We're doing a lot of Labour this morning. But this is something that, I mean, why don't we adopt this throughout the rest of the UK?
So this was brought in quite a long time ago now, really, and it was called the Charter for Change, and they looked at all the different schools in Wales, and they looked at how uniform was working, and the key thing was how can we make it affordable, and they decided to move to a system where you just have one uniform. That uniform is, you know, try to get all the bits you could get from supermarkets, reduce the amount of branding that you have on the uniform, and you just have one uniform that boys and girls can both wear to make it simple. And, you know, this is such a great idea. And in England, we started to make the movements towards this, but they buckled at the last minute. So we've just got this advice that schools should price up the cost of their uniform to work out what families are paying. Well, that's quite sensible.
Yes.
Should be doing that anyway.
Well, indeed.
And then have a minimal number of branded items, but not actually ruling them out altogether. And so we have the situation where we still have schools with lots and lots of branded items with the, school. If you've got the school badge on your blazer, that's one thing, but if it's on the blazer and you've got to have the bias binding on your shirt and you've got to have the...
Yeah, well, indeed. And also if you've got, I mean, I don't know if it's so much a thing here in England, but certainly in Northern Ireland we have school colours or some sort of different badge. I mean, with my grammar school, I was very lucky to go to a very good grammar school, Portadown College. What they did, which I think was really sensible, is that you bought a blazer, any black blazer from anywhere, and then you sewed the badge on, and everybody sewed the badge on, so there was no like school blazer. There was, you wore a black blazer and you sewed the badge on. Grania, we're going to come back to you after the news because there's so much more to discuss on this. We'll also be doing Cat of the Week. I know Grania is a fan of cats, as am I, so we will be doing that in just a few minutes here on Talk TV. We're going to be talking to Grania as well about obesity in children, so do stay with us here on Talk TV.
The thing that's really getting up my nose is how many of you moan about the fact that I have an opinion. I've been doing this for over 40 years. Of course I have an opinion. And if you get triggered or you get upset, you shouldn't watch. For the rest of us, an evening of entertainment live on TV and radio. Now, what do you want?
I don't want anything.
Thank you very much indeed.
Top class calls there.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Kate Partridge. The first of an 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port is underway. Unite members at Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out in a dispute over pay. The union says it will have a big impact, but a port source claims the action will be an inconvenience, not a catastrophe, a point echoed by the CEO of the UK Major Ports Group, Tim Morris.
There will inevitably be an impact from what's happening at Felixstowe. It'll be very interesting to see over the next couple of days whether it translates into being an inconvenience or actually more significant disruption, as it would have done perhaps 2 years ago before we were used to working in this much more flexible way. So a very interesting time for this to be happening.
Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association are being asked to vote on an indefinite, uninterrupted strike that would start on September the 5th. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng says in his own words that help is coming for people who'll struggle with their energy bills this year. He says work is underway on a package of measures but gave no details. Scotland Yard's being investigated after it emerged police met missing student nurse Awami Davis. Officers spoke to her on July the 6th after being called to an address in Croydon, hours after Essex police were told she'd disappeared. The police watchdog's now looking into what happened. And the president of Ukraine has congratulated Alexander Usyk on his victory over British boxer Anthony Joshua, saying it symbolises that Ukrainians won't give up. Usyk won on a split decision after the pair went the full 12 rounds, retaining his heavyweight titles in Saudi Arabia. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Thank you very much indeed to the person who's been in touch suggesting that... Where is this text? Let's see. I can't find it. It's someone who's suggesting anyway that trousers are worn by all students because it deals with the trans debate. It deals with some faiths who want children to wear trousers. Sorry, I can't find the tweet. But anyway, it was a good one. It was a good one. Anyway, we're going to go back to Grania in a second. But first of all, it is time for 10:30. I think it's probably time for a biscuit. So it's...
Cardi B's Biscuit Breakdown.
It's custard creams today. Dave, Tech Up Dave has very kindly given me some custard creams, back to a classic, so that's a good one. And I will be enjoying this over my tea. Going to talk to Grania more about school uniforms in a minute, but going to have that first. And we just got briefly time for our hugely popular thing that loads of people are sending their cats in for Cat of the Week. So it's time for Cat of the Week.
It's Cardi B's Cat of the Week.
So I am a rule maker and also a rule breaker. because we usually have one cat of the week, but I'm on twice this week, obviously on in this slot, in Richard Tice's slot as well. He's off on holiday, so we're having a second cat of the week, and this week it is Bathead, who is a human, and her Bathead's human pet is Kerry Williams, so thank you very much indeed. Bathead is a beautiful black cat. We can have a look at Bathead now on the screen if you happen to be watching on Talk TV. If you're not watching on Talk TV and you're listening on Talk Radio, I will retweet this and you will see a picture of Bathead. It's the best way to have a cat without having a cat, says Kerry Williams. He's not ours, but seems to have chosen us as a good alternative to his actual home. Cats are sometimes very, very clever and go to other people for love, affection, and indeed food. So there is Bathead. Thank you very much indeed to everybody who sent in their cat for Cat of the Week. So I really appreciate everybody doing that. Right, let's go back to Gráinne Hanahan, who is the senior analyst at the Times Education Supplement, because there's so much to talk about in regard to school uniforms and indeed the fact that there's a problem with obesity in children. Tell us about this, Gráinne.
So the issue with school uniforms ties into the obesity issue, because when we think about the sort of things we ask children to wear to school, from their shoes to the blazers to the shirts, it's not always conducive to being active during the school days. We think about what we want kids to do at break time and lunchtime. We know that in primary school, less playtime, they're not running around as much. And in secondary school, when I talk to the leaders in secondary schools, the complaint they always have is they just sit on the tables. They can't get them to use the whole fields. They're not very active. So, why is this a problem? Because we know that obesity, especially after the pandemic, when the NHS did their National Child Measurement Programme last year, they found that a quarter of all Year 6 pupils are now obese, and that a sixth of reception-aged pupils are obese. The problem increases as they go through the school year, and so we don't have the data on secondaries, but we can extrapolate it to imagine that it just gets worse and worse as they go through secondary school. So, you know, there's a really good argument to say actually footwear in primary and footwear in secondary should be footwear that you can run and move around.
Yes, well, that's a very good point, especially even if you're going between classes and stuff, you're likely to walk more slowly, I would imagine, if you're in formal shoes than in, say trainers. You can walk a bit faster, you can burn a few more calories perhaps. You can go, there does seem to be this really good idea that some schools do, the daily mile of walking a mile every day and so on. It seems to be a really good thing. I just want to put another point to you. This is another parent, Mary in County Down, who says a blazer heavy wool can only be dry cleaned at £12 a pop. For some age 16 grammar school daughters, blazers can cost £90. The boys' grammar school a mile away has a lower cost washable blazer around £50. When my daughter achieved academic honours in her GCSEs, there was a special blazer costing £150. It had some piping around the labels. That's it. That was what was special. My daughter in principle refused the honours blazer. Some of her friends from lower income families never told their parents it was available because they didn't want to put financial pressure on them. It's absolutely disgraceful. Pupils who work hard and show dedication to receive top results are rewarded by having a financial burden placed upon their families. I challenged the £150 blazer, and school eventually agreed that parents could buy some piping for £15 and stitch it into the £90 blazer. Appeal to introduce a cheaper blazer was rejected on the grounds that the expensive blazer looks good. I mean, this is horrendous. What planet are these people on?
Is the classic, let's do something really lovely. Let's reward those children who are working really hard with a special blazer, and then look at the outcome.
Usually you don't have to pay money for awards. This is absolutely crazy. It really is bad. Why are people sexualising a school uniform, says one tweeter. Why is it the girl has to give up the choice? Stop including everyone in one person's problem. Another person says, I think this was the original texter, possibly, maybe the texter, maybe not, who was talking about trousers. I see you said faith, not Muslim. No wonder British culture is dying with appeasers like you. I genuinely forgot you'd said Muslims, but there are some members of the Muslim community who would like their children to wear, their girls to wear trousers, aren't there?
Yeah, of course, and the having adaptations in the school uniform to make sure that includes all faiths, and I myself went to a Catholic school, and I know that for some Catholic schools they like the girls just to wear skirts and not to wear trousers. And so I think it's really important that when you're deciding your school uniform, it's something that you do with your parents. It's not something that you do to your parents, and that is the best practice advice to schools, that you do this in collaboration with your school community. You can't inflict rules upon people and expect them to follow them. You have to include them in that rule making. And when it comes to school uniform, and we talk about attendance, let's get get kids into school and make it as easy as possible for them to come to school. The Children's Commissioner, Rachel D'Souza, has got a huge push on this upcoming year. She wants all children in school on September the 1st. If we're actually serious about getting school attendance up and addressing the issues we have in school attendance in this country, then we need to think about what are those barriers. Is school uniform one of them? And if it is, why is it? And what can we do about it?
Do you support school uniforms as a general concept? Because the whole idea I was always told with school uniforms was that, you know, there's no, it's not a fashion parade. You don't have to compete. Everybody's wearing the same thing, and you sort of take the competitiveness out of it. You don't have to say, look at me, I'm wearing really fancy trainers, or I'm wearing an expensive top or a sports top or something like that. I mean, do you think the idea is a good one, Grania?
I think I still have those words ringing in my ears from my time at school. This is not a fashion parade. You've got to...
Because you were a campaigner, weren't you? You were at school. Tell us about your campaign. I'm fascinated by this. We only have about a minute left, but tell us about your campaign.
Oh no! So when I was at school, we had our school uniform dictated the colour of our underwear, and we had to only wear white and nude-coloured bras. And I really objected to this, as did some of my friends, and we started a campaign to allow us to wear black bras to school.
You started a campaign to wear black bras to school. Wow, impressive! And did you succeed?
We did, and they can wear whatever kind of bras you wanted. Hurrah! So yeah.
Excellent. Well, that's not a bad one. There's a number of people talking about the trans issue in regard to this. Gender neutral school uniforms are being pushed by the trans crowd again. Let girls dress like girls and boys dress like boys. Road to stupidity again. Just very briefly, what do you make of that kind of argument?
I think there's some confusion about gender-neutral uniforms and thinking that this means that you just have one uniform. Of course, I think the idea of gender-neutral uniforms is that you don't stop girls from wearing skirts. You allow girls to wear skirts, you can let boys wear trousers, and people can pick what they want, but you're not saying, like, you must wear this and you must wear that. It just seems more sensible. And, you know, breaking down gender stereotypes can only be a good thing, right? It's not, I think, forcing the idea that wearing a skirt makes you, no, I think that's a bit of nonsense. There's a misunderstanding of the argument for gender-neutral uniforms. It's not about, I think if you try and force...
I'm not wearing a black bra, Grania, no matter what you say.
And we're all fine with that.
You'll never force me to wear a black bra, Grania, with your campaigning. But listen, thank you so much to Grania Hallan. She's a senior analyst at TES, the Times Education Supplement. Fascinating thing. What's the most money you've spent on a school uniform? I'm fascinated by this argument. We'll discuss it more, including cost of living more generally, in just a few seconds here on Talk TV. Thanks to everybody who's been in touch on the school uniform issue. Jackie says, hi Peter, it's not just the uniform which is extortionate, it's the equipment too, the math set, the dictionary, the calculator, etc. It is such an expensive time of the year, and of course these things are not optional for your kids. You can't not have them in the right uniform, and they've got to have the equipment they need to learn. Thanks also to Pete, who says, agree that school uniform should not be a fashion parade and should be affordable, but then richer families will add an expensive watch and phone. It's an interesting one there, Pete, as well. Thanks so much to everybody who's been in touch on all sorts of different issues, not just the education issue as well, but many other ones as well. Angela says custard creams are yuck, and Pete says great choice for custard creams. That was in the biscuit breakdown. Tech Up Dave very kindly brought those in today. By the way, just if you think that Tech Up Dave is being fleeced for biscuits, fear not, I buy him a Diet Coke, although I'm not during the news break, but I'm not entirely sure that he's not doing a little bit worse than I am out of this. But you know, the good news is Tech Ups get paid much more than presenters. He's saying he's 250 quid down. I don't believe him for a second. Anyway, thank you to Jane, who says, hi Peter, great to hear you on a Sunday. Just feel all sides of the house are to blame for what is happening now. They need to work together for the benefit of voters. And finally, thank you very much indeed to Annie Christian, who says, a total treat having Peter Carwell on a Sunday. 10 minutes in to a show, this was sent a little bit earlier, 10 minutes into a show is already fizzing. Love it. Talk, please put Peter on Saturday and Sunday every weekend. Well, that would involve jettisoning Richard Tice, who is a friend of mine and very, very good at what he does, but who knows what happens with the schedule going forward. We shall see. But I love this. I love chatting to you. I love being on the radio. It's a really, really good thing, and I enjoy when everybody gets in touch, and you can get in touch by giving us a call 0344 499 1000. You can text me on 87222 with the word talk, and you can also tweet me at Talk TV. And it's so important for all of us here in Talk TV to remember, well, I say this fairly often actually, but 82% of our viewers and listeners are outside London. And if you ever hear me saying something like, oh, there's a tube strike today, isn't it dreadful? Oh, the weather is this. I want you to text or tweet in and say, Peter, you've got to remember that most of us are not sitting in London. We haven't got the same weather as you, and we don't have the tube, because we've got to remember we represent the whole of the UK. We're going to be talking about Northern Ireland later. That's a really, really important topic we're going to be talking about at 11 o'clock in terms of the leader there, one of the leaders there, the de facto First Minister Michelle O'Neill, the leader of Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, who says that she thinks that the troubles were, as she puts it, unavoidable. It was unavoidable in her estimation that lots of British soldiers got killed, lots of civilians in Northern Ireland got killed, lots of brave police officers, army people, Protestants, Catholics were killed, and they said that was unavoidable. I fundamentally disagree with her. I'll be talking to a defender of hers and someone who supports my side of the argument, so do stay with us for that a little bit later. But first of all, we're going to go back to the cost of living, because we have Paula Bowie, who is from Fusion Chocolates. And Paula, you're really feeling, first of all, you're very welcome to Talk TV this morning, but you're really feeling the pinch in the cost of living. Tell us about what's happening with your business.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a challenge anyway, and more of a challenge at the minute because the weather has been glorious for most of us.
Is that melting your chocolates?
Yeah, absolutely. Causes a chocolatier an absolute nightmare. Trying to produce chocolates in heat is just doesn't happen. It's very difficult, and so yeah, off the back of that, as well as the cost of living, we're having to use more fuel and energy because we're trying to refrigerate things much more than we would do normally, needing to invest in extra equipment like air cons and things like that to be able to keep the room cool, to be able to work, changing times of day that we're working in to try and battle it all. But the cost of living has had a real impact, definitely.
How many people do you employ, Paula?
None. It's just me.
So you're the classic kind of micro business, one person. You do it all yourself. So I mean, are you having to take a pay cut? Are you sort of what about all the kind of, you're talking about a lot of outgoings going up and so on? Are you putting your prices up? I mean, how are you dealing with this? What are the effects of all these challenges that you're facing?
It's a real battle to decide what to do, because obviously at the end of the day, we're here to make a living. We've all got to make a living.
Of course. You've got to pay your own bills, which are going up as well.
Our own bills, absolutely. But equally, we're very conscious that the end user is equally cutting back and being very careful about how they're spending their money.
And chocolates are presumably a luxury item as well. It's not something that you have every day. I mean, I'd love to have chocolate every day, but you don't. Maybe you have. Do you have chocolate every day, Paula?
Try not to. Tempting when you're surrounded by it all the time.
It's a tough one.
But no, I mean, obviously the chocolates I make are for the luxury market as well, which obviously makes it very difficult because we're very conscious that people are trying to cut back and trying to sort of keep a limit on what they're spending, and we're hoping to try and keep the prices the same, but equally at the same time when things like my cacao prices have gone up by 20% in the last 2 months.
That's the key ingredient for your yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
gone up by 20%.
Yeah. So chocolate's gone up by 20%. Royal Mail postage prices up by 20%. Back in October. We're finding that the knock-on effect from the pandemic was we were struggling to get hold of things like packaging, and packaging prices are also increasing. So it's very difficult to keep the prices the same, because at the end of the day we need to be able to make a profit, we need to be able to pay our own bills at home and support our families, but equally we're very conscious that we want to make sure that our consumer is still there and we're supporting them and allowing them to have those treats when they need them.
Yeah, absolutely, and just actually just have put a smile on your face, as I'm sure your chocolates do. Paula, tell us your website.
It's www.fusionchocolate.co.uk, or you can find us on social media at fusionchocolate.uk.
Excellent, Paula, thank you very much. One final thing. I am sure you're a great professional, Paula. I'm sure that you put a lot of time, effort, expertise into those chocolates, but I just like to say that for sure. And I was just wondering, maybe Tech Up Dave and I are here, he gives me biscuits every week. He's given me a custard cream, which is a bit plain.
This is what you need.
Well, I mean, if I need that, Paula, I'm just thinking, maybe you could send some to me. I don't know. I just
know what? Get them, drop your address down for me, and I'll
Oh, you legend, Paula! I tell you what. Next week on my show on Saturday, I promise you, we have a little tea break and we have a biscuit breakdown. Instead of the biscuit breakdown, we're going to have a chocolate tasting, and we're going to give out your website again next Saturday. Is that a deal? Is that okay?
That would be amazing.
Okay, well, get Tech Up Dave in the studio and we'll test your chocolates next week instead of the biscuits. That's very, very kind of you, Paula. I wish you all the very best with your business. It's a tough time, so thank you very much indeed to Paula Bowie from Fusion Chocolates there. If you want some nice luxury chocolates, Fusion Chocolates is the one she gave out her website there, and we'll be testing them next week. I'll get Tech Up Dave in the studio and we will try them. You're here next Saturday? Yes, he's got a big smile on his face. Looking forward to those chocolates. Hopefully they'll arrive on time. Royal Mail. Let's talk to Gordon Hughes, Professor Gordon Hughes, who is an honorary professor of political economy at the University of Edinburgh. Gordon, thank you so much for joining us this morning. You presumably heard what Paula was saying there and the pressure that's on so many businesses. We were hearing as well this morning from Labour. They have a policy where they say they want to freeze the price cap. They want to make sure that energy bills are kept down. They want to recall Parliament in terms of doing that. What is the answer to this problem in terms of the cost of living crisis? Because there are so many factors in all of this, some of them within the UK, some of them globally. Is there an answer? Is there not an answer? I mean, how do you read the situation?
I don't think there is a simple answer. There's probably not even a complicated one. The underlying problem is simple. We are poorer as a consequence of the increases in energy prices around the world. The question then is how we adjust to being poorer. And in effect, there are two options that are being put around. One is that we borrow in order to support people to maintain their levels of consumption. But in that case, we have to pay off that borrowing in the future. Or the other thing that we can do is that we can try and absorb the decline in our income via lower levels of consumption. But then the question is, who bears the cost of that? And I think one of the things that's very important is almost all of the focus has been on the residential sector, the price cap and the like. But your previous interviewee really emphasizes the fact that actually more than 60% of all energy consumption is by business, not by residential consumers. And so they are going to be very hard hit because there's no price cap for them. There's no provision at the moment by which they would benefit from any of the plans that are proposed. And the consequence of that is that we may find that we're just protecting one group of the population in order to transfer the hit to somebody else.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. It's interesting as well in terms of the fact that, the cost of living affects everybody, certainly, but but at the same time there are people on very high incomes, and it's by its very nature going to affect in a very different way. I wonder, I mean, the Twitter is not Britain, as David Cameron said. You've got to be very wary of things on Twitter and believing that everybody believes them. But nonetheless, the other day, if the price cap keeps going up the way it is in terms of energy, just one aspect of the cost of living crisis, the average bill in January is going to be something like £571 in a month for energy bills. I mean, there are just people who are just not going to be able to pay that. What happens then, Gordon?
Well, that's what I said about borrowing. In the end, the only way to protect those people is that we find the resources, whether it be from energy companies or the government or whoever, to essentially slow that impact down. We're not going to be able to remove it, because sooner or later we have to all pay the costs. It is a matter of choice about how we distribute that. And we can talk about transferring it to those who are better off or those who consume less energy. But unfortunately, most of the ways in which we can think of doing that actually have large downsides. They have ways in which they can be avoided, or other serious impacts in the longer term. I mean, I don't think anybody can underestimate the severity of what has happened.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be so bad if we hadn't borrowed so heavily for dealing with the COVID crisis over the previous 2 years. So we've had these shocks which have gravely hampered the progress of the British economy over 3 years.
Okay.
And it is the culmination of this that's the problem.
Okay, Professor Gordon Hughes, Honorary Professor of Political Economy at the University of Edinburgh, thank you so much indeed. Impressive bookshelf behind you as well, really impressed by that. Thank you to Kieran, who has been in touch. He says, poor woman tells you her business is struggling, and this tight git goes and blags himself some free merchandise. Shameless Peter. Well, I tell you what, Kieran, I'll pay her for the chocolates. Whatever they are, I promise you, I'll pay out of my own pocket for the chocolates, and we'll nonetheless have them on next week, and we will test them, and we'll give out our website again. So there you go, Kieran. I hope I'm not a tight git. I'm very sensitive to that criticism, clearly, but I will pay for the chocolates. Lots more coming up, including a big debate on Northern Ireland and the Troubles. Do stay with us here on Talk TV.
TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 11.
Good morning, I'm Kate Partridge. The first day of an 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port is underway. Almost 2,000 Unite members at a Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out in a dispute over pay. The union says it will have a big impact, but a port source claims the action will be an inconvenience, not a catastrophe, a point echoed by the CEO of the UK Major Ports Group, Tim Morris.
There will inevitably be an impact from what's happening at Felixstowe. It'll be very interesting to see over the next couple of days whether it translates into being an inconvenience or actually more significant disruption, as it would have done perhaps 2 years ago before we were used to working in this much more flexible way. So a very interesting time for this to be happening.
Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association are being asked to vote on an indefinite, uninterrupted strike that will start on September the 5th. Liz Truss has hinted she'll announce more help for those struggling amid the cost of living crisis. In an interview with The Sun on Sunday, the Foreign Secretary said that every government has to look at making sure life is affordable for people. The favourite to be the Prime Minister also hinted at support for small businesses. University bosses are calling for tuition fees to be raised closer to the £24,000 a year average that foreign students pay. They warn the current annual fee of £9,250 for UK students is forcing them to take on an ever-increasing number of foreign applicants. A record 1 in 5 undergraduates starting at top universities this autumn are from overseas, up by 7% in a year. Security forces in Somalia have rescued more than 100 people trapped inside a hotel that was stormed by Islamic militants. At least 12 people were killed in the attack at a hotel which is popular with politicians and lasted almost 30 hours. The Islamic extremist group Al-Shabaab, which has ties with Al-Qaeda, claims it was responsible. The police watchdog is investigating Scotland Yard after it emerged police met missing student nurse Awami Davis. Officers spoke to her on July the 6th after being called to an address in Croydon, hours after Essex police were told she'd disappeared. The President of Ukraine has congratulated Alexander Usyk on his victory over British boxer Anthony Joshua, saying it symbolises that Ukrainians won't give up. Usyk won on a split decision after the pair went the full 12 rounds, retaining his heavyweight titles in Saudi Arabia. After the judge's decision was declared, Joshua threw 2 of the title belts before storming out of the ring, but later congratulated his opponent.
Very, very, very upset. But I got to give the man his credit because he's done well. It takes a lot to come up in weight, challenge, win the belt, defend the belt. He's good. He's really, really good.
Now, the weather.
Times World News sponsors Talk TV Weather.
This morning, much of the country will get off to a dry and bright start, but a scattering of showers will develop, with some thicker cloud arriving into the southwest. Taking a closer look at lunchtime, and Scotland will have a much better day than yesterday, with a mixture of sunny spells and a few showers. Winds will also be lighter here than yesterday. Northern Ireland and Northern England will have a largely dry lunchtime, and it's here where we are most likely to see the best of the sunshine. Further south, and we're likely to see a mix of sunny spells and showers for many, but South Wales and South West England will have an increasingly grey and damp afternoon as a weather system moves in. Well, despite the cloud, it will feel increasingly humid here. The cloud and rain will move a little further northeast this afternoon, but for many, it will remain dry.
Times World News sponsors Talk TV Weather.
I think the topic that I'd like more people to be thinking about is definitely health and social care. You know, we have an outrageous system where we don't look after our elderly in the way we should. We've got to have a proper grown-up and honest conversation about that.
Well, a very good morning to you. It's 11 o'clock. I'm Peter Cardwell, sitting in for Richard Tice this morning. An absolute pleasure to have your company between now and 1 o'clock. Thanks to everybody who's not only watching on Talk TV, but everybody who's listening on Talk Radio as well. Perhaps you have just joined us. Perhaps you've had a well-deserved lie-in on a Sunday morning. There's loads to discuss between now and 1 o'clock, but thank you if you haven't had a lie-in. Thanks if you've been here from the start as well. This hour we're going to be talking about highly offensive comments to some in Northern Ireland, but some from many people actually agree with her. The de facto First Minister of Northern Ireland, Michelle O'Neill, the leader of Sinn Féin there, says that she believes the Troubles were unavoidable. All that killing, all that maiming, all those bombings, she thinks they were unavoidable, and that's been a controversial comment. So we're going to be talking about that in just a few minutes with people on two sides of the argument. We've got a Sunday newspaper review. I'm delighted that Ryan Saby is back. If you know Ryan, he is the Deputy Political Editor of The Sun, friend of the show. And also we're going to be taking your calls later today. So we want to talk about perhaps the interview with Peter Kyle, the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who's on earlier, talking about Labour's energy price cap, cost of living, if you want to talk about that. Or perhaps you want to talk about school uniforms and what you've paid for your kids, what you think of that. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Anything we cover in this on this show, or indeed anything you think we should be covering on this show. That number again, 0344 499 1000, and 87222 is the text number with the word talk, or you can tweet me at Talk TV. Thank you very much indeed to everyone who has been in touch already. We'll take your calls later this hour. Now then, as I was mentioning, and as you know, I'm from Northern Ireland, that's sort of fairly obvious. As I was saying, that Michelle O'Neill, who is the leader of Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, there's been a poll for the Belfast Telegraph in regard to her comment in a recent podcast with the BBC, where she said that she felt that the Troubles, 30 years of war in Northern Ireland, were unavoidable. The IRA's terrorist campaign, the response from loyalist terrorists, and the response from the UK state forces as well, the British Army, the RUC and so on. She felt that that it was unavoidable that the IRA go to violence. In an opinion poll for the Belfast Telegraph, 69% of those in the nationalist and Republican community, so people who think there should be a united Ireland, believe violent resistance to British rule during the Troubles was the only option. The only option. Violence is never the answer, I'm afraid, is my opinion. I think at the time, said Michelle O'Neill, there was no alternative, but now thankfully we have an alternative to conflict. That is the Good Friday Agreement. We're going to be talking to a defender of Michelle O'Neill in just a few minutes, but firstly let's talk to Mike Nesbitt, who is the former Victims Commissioner for Northern Ireland. He's also a member of the Assembly in Northern Ireland for the Ulster Unionist Party, so they're obviously a Unionist Party, think that the UK should remain as it is. He's also a former leader of that party and a very experienced broadcaster in Northern Ireland as well. Mike, it's very good to talk to you this morning on Talk TV. Thanks for taking the time.
Good morning, Peter. Good to talk to you.
Mike, what do you make of these comments by Michelle O'Neill?
I don't think we should be surprised about those comments, because if you or I had been guilty of the sort of human rights abuses that the IRA perpetrated over 30 years, we would be very keen to rewrite history and try and defend the indefensible, which is not to say that anybody has clean hands in terms of the conflict. If you think, for example, Bloody Sunday, when the Parachute Regiment killed all those people on the streets of Derry/Londonderry, when there was the most recent public inquiry, Lord Savile, saying that this was wrong, the British Prime Minister of the day, David Cameron, didn't say, the Parachute Regiment had no alternative. He said it was indefensible, it was unjustified and unjustifiable. And that's the contrast to what Michelle O'Neill is saying. And it's not just about the IRA murdering people. It's about the coercive control that they exercised, particularly over their own community. I mean, the IRA killed more Catholics than the army or the police. They also dragged people out of their own homes, tied them to lampposts, shaved their heads, and covered them in tar and feathers. So if we're going to deal with the past, let's do it through the lens of human rights abuses. And in terms, Peter, of is there a difference between the violence perpetrated by the IRA and the loyalist terrorists and the violence conducted by, say, the RUC or the army? I think there is a difference. Summed up in a famous conversation I overheard between a former senior member of the police service, the RUC, and a senior member of the IRA. And the policeman said to the IRA man, but I never woke up in the morning thinking, who can I hurt today? And the response to the IRA man was, but I did.
Yeah, Yeah, it's interesting as well when you mention that, as you correctly say, it's not just Republicans who believe violence was inevitable or justified. Many unionists believe loyalists were largely justified, those terrorists as well, in responding to IRA violence, allegedly defending their Protestant communities. They also often defend and endorse army and police actions against Republicans, shoot to kill, for example, the SAS actions. I mean, was it a war situation that some of those actions were justified in some way, do you think, Mike?
No. Everybody who put on a uniform of the state or the state forces had to act within the law, and where they have acted outside the law, I believe, and my party believes, they should be made amenable to the criminal justice system. It wasn't a war, Peter, because if it had been a war, many people, particularly members of the IRA, would have been in The Hague by now facing international war crimes convictions. So what we had was a terror campaign, and the difficulty I have with this is that I believe terror is an absolute, as in it is absolutely wrong, whereas people like Michelle O'Neill and before her the late Martin McGuinness justify it by saying, oh, the circumstances left us with no choice, and then it becomes a subjective issue. So when we get to 1998 and Michelle and Martin say violence is no longer justified because we now have a political agreement, that's fine for them, but there are other Republicans and other IRAs who say, no, the environment hasn't changed sufficiently. Violence is still justified. So then you have the Oma bomb, the worst single atrocity of the whole kind of 30 years of the conflict. You have Republicans going out and shooting police officers like Ronan Kerr and Stephen Carroll. You've got two British Army officers based in Antrim, just outside of Belfast, ordering a pizza, Patrick Asimcar and Mark Quincy, who get shot dead for that simple act of having a pizza before they fly to Afghanistan. So terrorism is absolutely wrong, and Michelle O'Neill is absolutely wrong to say there was no choice. It's a debate I had with the late Martin McGuinness many times, who tried to tell me that I, as a unionist, had left him no choice. My argument is, Martin, if you pick up a gun, you choose to pick it up. If you detonate a bomb, you choose to press the button. And he said, but you didn't grow up in the environment I grew up in Derry-Londonderry. And my answer to that, Peter, was, well, you're right, Martin. But John Hume did.
John Hume did. The Nobel Prize winner who, along with your former party leader, David Trimble, signed the Belfast Agreement in 1998, which allowed my generation to grow up in peace. Mike Nesbitt, former Victims Commissioner, member of the Assembly, former leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Someone who will disagree with what Mike has said is Chris Donnelly. Chris is a political commentator for the Irish News and Sunday Independent. Chris, you're very welcome to Talk TV this morning. How are you?
Morning, Peter. Not too bad.
You heard from Mike Nesbitt there, and there are lots of people who feel that Michelle O'Neill's comments were grossly offensive and historically inaccurate. What do you feel yourself?
Yeah, I think it's, and I wrote about this in the Irish News during the week, I think what needs to happen is a proper discussion on the place of violence in our history. I mean, I heard during your discussion, I thought it was a very interesting discussion between yourself and Mike Nesbitt there. You made the point of saying violence is never the answer, Peter, and whilst it's a sentiment I would concur with, hopefully it would never be the answer. You know, you grew up in the same part of Ireland as I did. There are hundreds of years of history where violence dictated precisely what happened. We have, on the 12th of July every year, people celebrate the fact that violence happened and led to the penal laws 300 years ago. We had, and this is where Michelle O'Neill would be coming from, the existence of Northern Ireland as a state only happened because of a triumph of terror and the threat of violence.
Hold on, let's just talk about... I get where you're coming from here, but let's talk about the Troubles itself. You're saying, your argument, if I'm characterising it correctly, Chris, is that the sweep of history meant that was inevitable. Is that correct?
Well, I think where we're sitting now, Peter, we're sitting just over 50 years from what would be deemed the start of the Troubles in 1969. And almost as fortune would have it, today, actually, if you look at what's happening in Dublin today, Peter, there's a significant commemoration, actually apologies, at Cork, where the leaders of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are coming together to remember this, you know, the death of Michael Collins. Now, the same Michael Collins, who would have faced the same charge of terrorism and violence not being the answer, is now lauded as a patriot, as a leader who created an independent Irish state. So this is not a black and white issue. I do think there has been a misinterpretation, particularly of this poll that came out over the weekend, Peter. When people are asked the question, do you think that there was no alternative historically, they're looking saying, do you think that there was no alternative? And people answer yes. They're most certainly not saying, oh, well, then I supported this woman being blown up or this individual being killed. That's not what happens in history. People, when they're asked the question, when they look at was there a sense of historical inevitability looking back to the explosion of the Troubles in 1969? From a nationalist perspective, yes, there was, because the creation of the state and what happened from 1921 to 1969 led to a pent-up sense of frustration and sense that there's no other way amongst many. Not all people.
Chris, I'm conscious of time here. You will unsurprisingly find that I disagree with a lot of your saying. I mean, you're the head of a school in North Belfast, aren't you?
West Belfast.
West Belfast, apologies, West Belfast. So that's in the heart of one of the most deprived communities of the UK or Ireland. Deeply scarred, traumatised by the conflict, intergenerational trauma is evident there. You'll know far more about it than I will. You've experienced up close for decades. Surely you agree that the trauma, the deprivation, the suffering by the kids and their parents means that the violence was not justified?
Well, I think it's not a matter of justification. It's a matter of saying, was it the issue around this polling? Was it a sense that it was?
So, do you feel it was unjustified? Do you feel it was justified or unjustified? Let me ask you that question.
Well, I don't think I wouldn't put it in terms of justified, unjustified. What happened wasn't. I mean, the first murders of the Troubles happened from the UVF in 1966.
Okay.
You had eight people killed.
Chris, sorry, lots. I'm not saying who started it. I'm saying, was the IRA's campaign justified? Yes or no?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of justifying it, because, I mean, I'm certainly...
So it wasn't justified?
IRA, but we're looking at... Well, it's not a simple question like that. There were certain things...
It is. Killing people is wrong. I'm sorry, it's really simple. Killing people is wrong. Killing people, being a terrorist, is a bad thing.
If killing people is wrong, then why did we have a British Empire? Why do you have Remembrance Sunday when what British soldiers are doing throughout the world is remembered, Peter? I mean, that's the context you have to have this conversation. If you want to... So
you think the IRA were an army? Well, they were an army. They were a paramilitary organisation. They were terrorists, and you think that this was justified because this was a war, and it was inevitable that people joined the IRA and did what they did. Is that what you're saying? Am I characterising that correctly?
What I've said is, I don't... This tabloid-like talk about justification, I don't think that's necessarily...
I'm sorry, that's not tabloid talk. That's a very straightforward question. Do you believe what the IRA did was justified or not?
Well, I
think it was unjustified. Do you think it was unjustified?
Many things that people would have done in Irish history were unjustified. The creation of the Northern Ireland state was unjustified. The creation of
so you've given us your opinion on one of those things, but you're not going to give us your opinion on whether the IRA's campaign was justified or unjustified. Is that right?
I certainly think there might have been a degree of inevitability to what happened. I certainly would not justify many of the horrendous, horrific things that were done by the IRA or by loyalists or by many people in the British security services. And I think what's most important, and the tragedy of all this is, we're talking about this 50 years after it would have happened, Peter. But
people are still living. People are still living with the effects. There are injured people. There are people.
Peter, of course there are. But here's the rub of the matter, and I think Michael alluded to this too. It is no surprise that there are different narratives over the past. For goodness sakes, the Good Friday Agreement was important because there were people from John Hume and David Trimble, who you alluded to representatives of loyalist paramilitaries, and then obviously Sinn Féin, who signed up to it. The DUP signed up later on in their own way. That is a quarter of a century ago. The only reason we're having this row now is because some people seem to believe, some people are shocked that there are contrasting narratives to the past. Contrasting narratives to the past stretches back 4 centuries, which is what I'm alluding to at the start.
Chris, thank you, Chris Donnelly, for your thoughts there. We've got to go to a break there. Chris is a political commentator for the Irish News and Sunday Independent. Really appreciate your time, Chris. This is Talk TV. Thank you so much to everybody who's been in touch, not just on the Northern Ireland issue, but on others as well. Yule in Ballymena has been in touch to say, surely the comments of Michelle O'Neill of Sinn Féin in support of the premeditated mass murder of the IRA are offensive to all right-thinking people. Thank you, Yule, for that. On school uniforms, Pete says, agree that school uniforms should not be a fashion parade, but should be affordable. But then the richer families will add an expensive watch or phone. Good morning, Peter Cardwell. I don't care what kids wear at school, but I do believe that due to the extortionate cost, they should be provided free of charge, like when you need to wear certain clothes at work. The company issues usual 2 of each item twice a year. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I didn't know that. I've never actually had a uniform at work. Carol says, Peter, if the schools made to subsidise these uniforms, perhaps they would not be so pushy with these Victorian attitudes. I believe in uniform as the poorest children cannot afford designer brands, but to insist on a not cheap uniform is scandalous. I completely agree with you, Carol. I think that head teacher, that was a school in Belfast Royal Academy, spotted that story in the Belfast Telegraph, was, completely tone deaf, especially in a cost of living crisis as well. So thanks to everybody who's been in touch about that story. Right then, let's talk about the papers. Ryan Saby is here from The Sun, not The Sun on Sunday anymore.
No,
so if you're a regular viewer of my Saturday programme, you remember that Ryan very kindly used to come in when he was doing The Sun on Sunday. Saturday is obviously the big day for the Sunday papers, but now you're off on Saturdays. It's feed up pina colada for you.
No, exactly. It was a bit strange yesterday, first Saturday off, knowing what to do with myself.
Right, but now through a quirk of fate, through Richard Tice being off, here you are again today. So thank you very much. Hope the new job's going well for you, Ryan.
No, it's all good. Very, very busy. Lots of things going on last week, this week, and we also got a new Prime Minister coming up, so we're busy for the next few weeks, months. God knows how long.
Well, to say, you think there's a bit of a lull, and then party conferences are coming up as well. So yeah, we'll both be there. So Deputy Political Editor of The Sun, very many congratulations on that. Now, on the thing that is affecting every single person in this country, the cost of living crisis. Lots of people were talking. Peter Kyle, actually, the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, was sitting in that seat just over an hour ago talking about Labour's plan. But on the BBC, you've noticed, and in a few of the papers as well, Kwasi Kwarteng, who many people expect to be the new Chancellor of the Exchequer if Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister, which she probably will, says help is coming. What is that help?
That's right. Kwasi Kwarteng has written a piece in the Mail on Sunday today, and he is basically spelling out how Liz Truss, who could be his next boss, basically saying that all households should be getting some help. And she spoke, and Liz Truss is out today saying that help will be there across the board. She's looking at that help of what can be given to people. It's a really interesting piece. I think it's really interesting that they've got Kwasi out there writing, because he's that person who could be the next Chancellor.
Yeah, so he's already setting out his stall. I mean, is this maybe, I mean, they would obviously deny this, but clearly they believe that Liz Truss becoming Prime Minister is a foregone conclusion.
I think so.
Maybe it is.
Yeah, I think so. I think it might be a little bit closer than what people think, but
it's going to be very embarrassing for them if Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister.
No, absolutely. At that point, you just hope that both teams are talking to civil servants and their transition teams are actually getting the work done so they can hit the ground running on day one, because you don't want to be going into number 10 cold. So
absolutely.
So I think, yeah, but Kwasi Kwarteng outlining here what Liz Truss's plans will be. He talks about how she will reverse the national insurance rise, and there'll be that moratorium on energy levies. But we haven't got anything sort of concrete from them. So I think they're probably working them up. Speaking to maybe people in the Treasury. Don't forget, of course, that Kwasi Kwarteng is still in the business department.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
He will still be talking to officials. He'll be sort of working up plans. And also remember that civil servants don't like doing too many. I would say don't like do too much work, but when you've got people who are outgoing, so the Prime Minister's about to leave.
There've been complaints, haven't there, that as soon as the transition was going to happen, as soon as Boris Johnson resigned, essentially had a big reshuffle, put lots of people in. So you have people like Nadhim Zahawi, who's the Chancellor at the moment, probably only for a few more weeks, probably only for a few weeks in total, and people within the Conservative administration saying, well, civil servants are just not doing what we tell them to, because they're saying, well, someone might come in, and in fairness to the civil servant, someone might come in on the 6th or 7th of September and say, actually, well, we're going to do things completely different. So all the work you've just put into this is going to be scrapped.
It seems sensible that the Treasury are getting all the cards on the table. And we had Kit Malthouse this week saying that the country, or the government in particular, is on a war footing. And I don't know if that sounds a little bit over the top when it comes to the cost of living crisis, but I think there does seem to be needs to be everything laid out. So when that Prime Minister comes in, they can just pick, you know, two, I don't know, however many decisions they need to make. Just pick what they need to go forward and actually enact it for the British
I think there's a lot of
country.
frustration that's taken so long as well. Also in the Sun, your paper, Liz will do, or the Sun on Sunday, I should say, Liz will do the biz PM. Liz will do the biz. PM favourite Liz Truss could cut taxes for tradesmen, and hence families will get more help with soaring energy bills. I mean, this is really part of what you're saying as well. So that's sort of backing up what Carsey Carting is saying, presumably coordinated. What's she saying in your paper?
I think it's really interesting that it'll be music to the ears of self-employed people in particular. I've seen a lot of controversy about this tax rule. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but the IR35.
IR35, that old chestnut.
So I think that she's going to hold some sort of review into that.
What is IR35?
It is to do with the tax. You've asked me there. It's to do with the tax rules about. I'm going to have to come back to you on that one, Peter. But yeah,
we'll Google it in the break.
No, exactly. But there was lots and lots of controversy. So the last government, that they changed the rules, and there's absolute uproar over that. But it looks like that could be good news for people who who do their own books and who work for themselves. So I think that'd be music to their ears. But she always comes back to tax cuts, and she says in this piece in the Sun on Sunday, talking to my colleague Kate Ferguson, tax cuts are always on my agenda.
Yeah.
So that's where she's coming from. So if you're thinking about Liz Truss, just think what that goes. It's like a stick of rock. Tax cuts go through her like that stick of rock.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Ryan. We're going to come back to you after the news. Thanks to everybody else who's been in touch. One on the green levy as well. Bob says, Cardi, back to the green levy. The 20% has effectively doubled and will increase along with the total price. Why do they need more money than they were getting 2 years ago? Have it, says Bob. Thank you very much indeed for that. John from Lincolnshire. In France and Germany, they do not have school uniforms. Interesting that Peter, who said near the end of his career, did not know that. There we are. Thank you very much indeed. We're back with Ryan after the news in just a second.
The thing that's really getting up my nose is how many of you moan about the fact that I have an opinion. I've been doing this for over 40 years. Of course I have an opinion. And if you get triggered or you get upset, you shouldn't watch. For the rest of us, an evening of entertainment live on TV and radio. Now, what do you want?
I don't want anything.
Thank you very much indeed.
Top class of calls then.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Kate Partridge. The first day of an 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port is underway. Unite members at Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out in a dispute over pay. The union says it will have a big impact, but a port source claims the action will be an inconvenience, not a catastrophe, a point echoed by the CEO of the UK Major Ports Group, Tim Morris.
There will inevitably be an impact from what's happening at Felixstowe. It'll be very interesting to see over the next couple of days whether it translates into being an inconvenience or actually more significant disruption, as it would have done perhaps 2 years ago before we were used to working in this much more flexible way. So a very interesting time for this to be happening.
Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association are being asked to vote on an indefinite, uninterrupted strike that would start on September the 5th. It's understood that Boris Johnson has given the green light to construction of a £30 billion nuclear power station in Suffolk. The agreement over the Sizewell C reactor was authorised a few weeks ago, but there's concern it could tie the next government's hands and disrupt any financial plans he or she may have. Meanwhile, Liz Truss has hinted she'll announce more help for those struggling amid the cost of living crisis. In an interview with The Sun on Sunday, the Foreign Secretary said that every government has to look at making sure life is affordable for people. And the President of Ukraine has congratulated Alexander Usyk on his victory over British boxer Anthony Joshua, saying it symbolises that Ukrainians won't give up. Usyk won on a split decision after the pair went the full 12 rounds, retaining his heavyweight titles in Saudi Arabia. Well, that's all for now. We'll have more news in half an hour.
many thanks to Adrian Baird in Buckhurst Hill, who's been in touch. He says, IR35, Peter, attempts to place the dividing line between employment and self-employment. Enjoy your biscuits. Adrian, that is a great text. Thank you very much indeed. And saved me a Google, so I could sit and gossip to Ryan during the news there. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thanks to Maddie, who says, I love your shows, Peter, but I am absolutely disgusted to listen to Chris Donnelly and his mindset to appease the devastation caused by the IRA. An awful, awful time in the history of Northern Ireland. The murders of those innocents, for example, Jean McConville, the Shankill Road bomb, Bloody Friday, and every other victim who died of suffered after they decided violence was the answer. How dare he, says Maddie. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on that. Crystal has been in touch as well to say Chris seems to be shrugging off having this conversation years later. History has a very scary way of repeating itself. The old narratives tend to stay close by. Our world is filled with the old narratives repeating itself. Violence repeats too often. Thank you to Crystal for that. Another one on this, Dan from Kent says, I don't have a clue what point Chris was trying to make, apart from not knowing the difference between a soldier trying to defend democracy and a terrorist whose main aim is to spread terror. Thank you very much indeed for that. Lots of other thoughts from various people on all sorts of things. And I mean, I've just loads and loads of texts and tweets. I will try and read out as many as I can. Also, if you want to get your voice on the air, we're going to be taking some calls in just a few minutes. Get your point in now, and then we give you a ring back. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Thank you very much to everybody who's rung already. We'll fit in as many calls as we can. After we talk to Ryan, who there's another story actually in The Sun on Sunday today. This is GPs who are writing prescriptions, not just for medicine, but to give people discounts on their energy bills. What on earth is going on here?
Well, this is a plan that has been drawn up in the Treasury. Now, I think what's happening, as we said before, the Treasury are drawing up all these plans ahead of the new Prime Minister coming in.
So this is just a proposal?
This is a proposal that the officials were working on, but it is, as it says here, is an absolutely wacky idea. I mean,
the idea of how are very good at giving you medicine for what's happening, but they're not social workers.
No, they're not. I think the idea is that you would go in, you would see your GP, and if you needed help with energy bills, you know, they would be able to effectively sign a prescription. You could then take that prescription down to the local council office, or you'll get a sort of a rebate in the fund in the terms of.
So is this to do, like, if you're a medical condition, for example, if you need heat, for example, or something like that?
I think so. And but the trouble is, it's very, very difficult at the moment to actually get a GP appointment. They're obviously under a lot of strain themselves. So for them, and also, if the incentive is to go and see your GP to get some money off your energy bills, you can imagine everyone.
Well, the demand is going to be even higher. And also, how on earth can the GP assess you? I mean, you might be a pensioner who has loads of money and be saying, "Oh, I feel cold, give me money." I'm not saying that many pensioners would do that, but there's bound to be some abuse of the system. I'm sure in most cases would be completely genuine. But there will be some abuse of the system.
I am sure this is one of those ideas that's been spoken about in the Treasury, but when it comes down to it, this is not going to get off the ground.
It sounds to me like a pretty crazy idea brought up by civil servants who are not entirely sure, related to reality.
I think this is what a long hot summer has done to some people. They're
thinking the unthinkable.
The blue sky thinking, what can we do to? They're trying to help. And I think it's one of those ideas.
And this is actually the problem, isn't it? When you say to civil servants, think the unthinkable, then stuff like this comes up, then it's in papers, and we're talking about it saying
absolutely.
Okay. And on another matter, let's talk about the Daily Mail. The Lionesses, who won the Euros, set for a £2 million luxury sponsorship deal with Land Rover. I mean, these brilliant women have done really well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's about time they got a slice of the pie from their male counterparts, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. The report here, as you say in the Mail on Sunday, Chloe Kelly. Now, she was the person who you saw when they won. She was waving her shirt around her head, and she was there with her, showing off her sports bra. She seems to be that sort of figurehead of the England team, and she signed is in the offing a £2 million deal with the Land Rover, which is a pretty good deal. I mean,
that's a very good deal. It's a lot more money than she will have been earning as a female footballer, I imagine. Because obviously the men earn huge amounts of money, but the women really, really don't.
And with a deal like that, you're seeing some sort of parity with the men's game. You've got Captain Leah Williamson, who's already signed a deal with Gucci and Pepsi and Nike, and defender there's Lucy Bronze here says she's already signed a deal with some drinks companies and some phone companies. But I think that sponsors, they'll have to, as I say, reach parity with the men's game. It just won't be a good look if it's found out that a top Premier League star is getting paid X amount, and the women's
the gender pay gap is a huge one in professional international football.
And also, how many of those men have actually won a Euros?
Well, indeed. Yeah,
so I think that's going to be the selling point from those agents and those players when they go into that negotiation.
I would imagine there'd be some pretty hard-headed agents who are doing a good job. Story in the Times you've seen as well about the princess, what film and television don't show you about the real Diana. I mean, I don't know about you, I feel I know absolutely everything there is to know about Princess Diana. Believe it or not, it's 25 years since she died in that car crash in Paris. I mean, unbelievable.
Incredible. And this is a story here from in the Sunday Times where we've got Lord Stevens, who headed that investigation into what happened into that crash, Operation Paget. Now, he's saying that a sizable minority will never be persuaded, a sizable majority, that she was not murdered. So there's all these conspiracy theories still floating around. They've now entered the realms of sort of TikTok is sort of awash with these false allegations that the security services may have had something to do with it.
Such nonsense. There was a drunk driver who was driving too fast, and then there was a car crash.
Absolutely. So he says here she was very popular. People just find it very difficult to understand how someone like that could die in such an accident. And I think there are people who are maybe of a certain age who just read every single detail of this, probably followed the inquiry. I mean, I attended that inquiry for a few days. I mean, it went on for months and months and months. The reports, it was in so much paperwork that was sort of produced, after that report and its conclusions. Absolutely. And I think it becomes more and more galling for the rest of the family who have to.
It must be horrendous for them listening to all this nonsense and wrecked up over the time and so on.
It says here that Lord Stevens looked into 104 allegations and false ideas during that investigation. So that's why it took so long.
Well, on a lighter note and on a happier note, because this is someone who's had problems with his health, Peter Kay, the comedian, is returning after 5 years away from the limelight.
That's right. It looks like he's done some sort of charity gig, and it's really good that he's come back. He's one of the funniest people in the country.
He's brilliant. His Bullseye sketch, I still watch it on YouTube. It's so good. I mean, it's kind of in one. I loved everyone. I mean, as a kid, I just watched Bullseye. My favourite Peter Kay joke is homophobia is a terrible thing. It must be awful to be afraid of where you live. I love that joke. It's so good. It's so good. And just his observations on weddings and all the kind of. I mean, he's the sort of observational comedy, and even the title of one of his tours was the Mum Wants a Bungalow tour, which I thought was very good. But good to see him back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I hope you just want him to go on one of those big tours. I think at one point he actually cancelled a really, really big tour that he was doing. But if we can get him around the country, seeing him, that'd be.
Well, we all need a laugh at the moment.
No,
don't we? Ryan Saby, who is now the deputy political editor of The Sun. Well done, and great to see you. And thank you so much for your paper review. Thanks to Jenny, who's been in touch as well. He says, I have no problem with strikes, but the union leaders seem to be more interested in coordinating the dates of the strike, bringing the government down, playing politics, than what the individual strikes are about. Jenny, I missed my friend's wedding yesterday because I couldn't get there. The only way to get there was by train. I suppose I could have hired a car, but I looked into it. It was hundreds and hundreds of pounds. I didn't. I mean, that's just one very, very ordinary story of there's so many people, many more people far worse off. But it was just a bit annoying for me. Thanks to everybody who's been in touch, including Brian in Belfast, who says, when I was at primary school in the 60s, we had a slipper bag hanging on our peg and changed from outdoor shoes to plimsoll gutties when we arrived in the morning. Brilliant idea. Brian, thank you very much for that. And yes, children should be moving around. There's a load of topics people are getting in touch about. We're going to take your calls in just a few minutes here on Talk TV. So you've just caught me. I've got my phone. I'm taking a photograph of the text that Annie sent in, who said, a total treat having Peter Cardwell on the Sunday, 10 minutes in, and a show is already fizzing. She sent that earlier on. Love it. Talk TV, please put Peter on Saturday and Sunday every weekend. I've taken a picture of that that's come up on my screen, Annie, and I'm going to WhatsApp it to my boss a little bit later on. So shameless. Yes, that's me. Thanks to everybody who has been in touch. Really, really appreciate all your calls, texts and tweets. Going to take some calls in a second, but school uniform is a big, big issue. Jill has been in touch. She says the problem with no school uniforms is that teenagers will have to have the latest expensive fashion. At least a uniform stops that. Jill, I agree with you. I agree with the concept. It's just getting that right, I suppose. The government, Chris in Newbury says, the government can borrow as much as they want as long as they start fracking and drilling more oil and gas from the North Sea. The crisis is every security given away by the sustainability lobby over the last 2 decades. I won't have my tax subsidising green idiots' agenda. We're going to talk about net zero in a second. We've got a caller who wants to talk about that. Jacqueline says, I'm in favour of paying the gas and electricity bill for pensioners and the disabled and parents of disabled children in full. But I'm sorry, the self-employed working class don't have a rent cushion to fall back on. Get a job. Interesting. Carol says, why does Liz Truss think tax cuts are great? It doesn't help half the population out of work on benefits or pensioners. On normal pensions, the richest benefit. Again, Carol, that's a really, really interesting point. 2 out of 5 people, 40% of people in this country, do not pay income tax for whatever reason. They don't pay income tax. Either they're below the threshold or they have a different form of, they're living in a different way. So, Carol, that's a really, really interesting point. And but I think it's interesting with Liz Truss. I mean, she has to appeal to the Conservative membership at the moment. And it'll be really interesting to see how she has to kind of change things when she becomes, almost certainly, she becomes Prime Minister. So it'll be really interesting to see. That's a really intelligent point there. That's Carol West. Thank you. On the Labour plan, we heard from Peter Kyle at the start of the programme, Labour frontbencher in the studio. Mitch says, how interesting to hear that Labour actually has a plan for the first time in months, even if it's utterly impractical. Less than 24 hours to open up Parliament. That's the plan, says Mitch. Actually, no, it's not. I mean, they're calling for Parliament to be recalled, Mitch. They're calling for Parliament to be recalled, but that's so they can implement their plan. I mean, it's been their plan for some months, so I'm afraid I've got to disagree with you on that. Chris says, according to Full Fact, 25% of electricity costs in the Green Levy, 8% gas. That's far more than the MP is stating. It is. I thought his figures might have been wrong on that. Most people pay more for electricity than gas. Insulation makes little difference to electricity costs. He's talking nonsense. Well, let's talk about Peter Kyle's interview a bit earlier, because a load of people got in touch about that, including William in West Sussex. William, what did you make? First of all, you're very welcome to Talk TV this morning. How are you doing?
Oh, very good indeed.
Excellent. What would you make? What do you make of what Peter Kyle said there? He's just to say there's a Labour frontbencher. He spoke earlier.
Do you know what? Well, I've got a lot of friends who live in Hove, and you know, every morning they wake up and they look at the Rampion 1 wind farm, and they see those big blades doing absolutely all. Absolutely zilp. But you know something, this whole green thing is just a nonsense. When he said actually,
why do you say? Hold on. Why do you say it's a nonsense? This green thing is a nonsense. 99%. Hold on a second, William.
Okay.
99% of scientists across the world believe that climate change is a thing. Man-made climate change is a thing. It's happening. The planet is heating up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look. You know what? Temperatures change. Do you know something? The big thing in the sky that we see every night called the moon, that controls the tide. That controls the tide. The sun controls the climate. Do you honestly think for one moment that flying aeroplanes, driving cars, putting coal in blast furnaces to create steel, do you actually honestly think, if you just logically thought for just 10 seconds, that controls the climate?
It does. I'm sorry, emissions, carbon goes into the atmosphere and deals...
trace gas. But look,
sorry, say that again. You said, what did you say after I said?
Carbon is just a trace gas. I mean, if you want to kind of
sorry, William, I'm sorry. You're denying science here.
I'm not denying science. Well, actually, I'm not denying science at all. Although it is quite funny how the Green Party can deny the science that there's 2 genders. They're allowed to.
Okay, well, let's not talk about gender. I'm happy to talk about it some other time, William. But we're talking about the climate at the moment. Yeah. I mean, what would you do? What would your plan be?
Oh, nuclear. Total nuclear.
Well, we can agree on that. Nuclear power is a good thing.
In the meantime, though, however, you know, investing wastes of money into a wind. I mean, let me tell you something, Peter. Do you know this is something that no one ever says? Wind farms only. Do you know the Beaufort scale? It's something you do on yachting. Okay, wind farms only work between force free gentle breeze, and up to a force 5. Above a force 5, approaching gale force, you have to switch it off.
It can be too windy for a wind farm.
Yeah, but below that, it doesn't generate anything. So you're literally having to rely on a constant wind speed of between 10 and 23 knots. That doesn't happen in this country. It's either no wind or really windy. I mean, yeah, of course it does happen from time to time. Last week, on the hottest day of the year, that Rampion 1 wind farm generated zip, nothing, absolutely nothing. It's cost £1.3 billion to build. It's probably going to cost another £15 billion over the next 30 years to maintain.
Okay.
In that time, you could have actually built a nuclear power station.
And we should build nuclear. I totally agree with you, William.
The Rampion 1 wind farm only produces electricity for about 300,000 homes.
And nuclear is actually, I mean, look, there have been nuclear disasters, no doubt about that, but it is safe as well. William, I agree with you on some points, disagree with you on others. Thanks so much for your call. Really appreciate giving us a call on 0344 499 1000. Let's go to Mark in Birmingham. Mark, you want to talk about net zero?
Yes, please, Peter. Morning.
Hello, how are you doing? You all right?
I'm all right, mate. Yeah. All it was, it's just a few points there, Peter.
Go for it.
I think the bottom line is, every time we have a run for a Prime Minister or, the next party, they all come up with lots of quick fix solutions to make them sound great so they can get in. We don't need this. What we need is an all-party agreement that they're going to start, whoever's in power is going to build, for example, nuclear power stations.
But what happens if they have an all-party agreement that you disagree with that says that we've got to get net zero by 2050, for example?
I would disagree with that. I think you've only got to look at the state of the country now with what happens when they start pushing net zero. And I think that when we have our MPs go to Davos and all these other different
big conferences around the world,
meetings,
COP26, yeah.
Yeah, the public should be given a vote, right? Do we want to help towards green energy by a long-term effort with nuclear power stations, or are we going to race for this net zero where we're running out of power, we're going to have blackouts, the bills are going through the roof? This has got to be staggered. Not immediate. It's not doing any of us any favours whatsoever.
I mean, the counter-argument and what Peter Kyle would say to that point, Mark, is actually you've got to kind of speculate to accumulate. You've got to put money into these renewable sources now so that we save the environment and save our energy security and energy supply. You would disagree with that, presumably?
I would disagree with that. I think at the end of the day, I think nuclear is the way to go. A lot of people are coming up with fracking, even some of the guys on your programme.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's a big argument people have, yeah.
My question, I've got reservations about fracking. I want to see what the water courses are like in other countries from areas that have been fracked. Have they been polluted from it? I'd also like to look, the guys that are pushing it the most heavily, are they the ones with the biggest investments in it?
It's a fair point. We have to ask all these questions, Mark. You make some really good points, Mark in Birmingham there. Thank you so much for your call. Let's go to Colin, who's in Macrofelt in County Londonderry. Colin wants to talk about school uniforms. How are you doing, Colin?
Hi, Peter. How are you doing? Yeah, I would
very well.
Sorry.
Go ahead. What point would you like to make, Colin?
Yeah, what it is, my local school actually, say, for example, the PE shorts, they're branded. They're £23. The exact same pair of PE shorts on Amazon are £9.
That's ridiculous. So to have a badge on them, they've jacked up the price by £14.
Yeah. The hoodie is £49, and you're talking £16 on Amazon, eBay, a lot cheaper.
So this is just a wheeze for a lot of schools to make money, isn't it? Of students and many people. Well, everybody's feeling the cost of living. What have you talked to the school about this, Colin?
I talked to the school last year where I had an issue where they say, look, we designate these shops. There are designated shops, and if you have a problem with them, you have to take it up with them. The problem with those shops where they actually told me, if you don't like it, you know what you can do.
Oh, lovely.
Because in Macrofelt, there's only 2 retailers that you're allowed to go till that does the logo.
I just think that's ludicrous. Do you not, Colin?
No, absolutely ridiculous. This last week, also I've spent 3 to 4 days onto the Education Authority you know the school funds and the practical subjects that the school charge?
I don't know about that. Tell me about that.
Well, this is something that I think really, really needs highlighted even more so than the uniforms. Nobody is jumping on this at all.
Well, highlight it now, Colin. Tell us about it.
Right. I've got a bill here from my school, and per child, the school fund is £30 per child, and practical subjects is £40 per child.
Practical subjects. So that what does that mean? Like technology and things where you need
that
science and things like that.
Economics.
Yeah.
Technology, construction.
Okay.
If you needed, for example, last year we did pay that, and my son had a bowl of fruit, like £30, and he made a bowl of fruit, a pancake, and 2 buns. Right.
Well, that seems pretty pricey for that.
So absolutely ridiculous. But what most people in Northern Ireland do not realise, I've got billed by my school. Now I've got on to the Education Authority where I was reading up on it. This is a voluntary payment.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, I wonder how they would treat you if you decided not to pay it.
Well, I have actually done that.
Oh, good. Good for you.
I got on to the Education Authority. It has taken me 3 days to get a finalisation. I'm saying, but nobody knew. I said, this is actually on your actual site,
right,
that it's voluntary.
Yeah.
Now, this school and Big Red Wright and I have been billed. This is a fee due.
Yeah.
I said, why is that not classed as a voluntary?
I think it makes some really
voluntary fee due. So I rang the school after speaking to them. I said, I'm not paying this.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of really, really good points, Colin. Thank you very much indeed. That's Colin in Mackerfeld in Londonderry. Thank you very much indeed to this person who has texted me to say, sorry, but Peter Cardwell is just a lefty establishment arse. Doesn't have a clue about science or much of anything at all. Well, thank you very much indeed for that. I think you're wrong, not just about my surname, but always good to hear good things and bad things when you contact us here at Talk TV. We're going to talk more after the news. Do stay with us here.
TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 12.
Good afternoon, I'm Kate Partridge. The first day of an 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port is underway. Almost 2,000 Unite members at Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out in a dispute over pay. The union says it will have a big impact, but a port source claims the action will be an inconvenience, not a catastrophe, a point echoed by the CEO of the UK Major Ports Group, Tim Morris.
There will inevitably be an impact from what's happening at Felixstowe. It'll be very interesting to see over the next couple of days whether it translates into being an inconvenience or actually more significant disruption, as it would have done perhaps 2 years ago before we were used to working in this much more flexible way. So a very interesting time for this to be happening.
Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association are being asked to vote on an indefinite, uninterrupted strike that would start on September the 5th. Liz Truss has hinted she'll announce more help for those struggling amid the cost of living crisis. In an interview with The Sun on Sunday, the Foreign Secretary said that every government has to look at making sure life is affordable for people. The favourite to be the Prime Minister also hinted at support for small businesses. It's understood that Boris Johnson has given the green light to construction of a £30 billion nuclear power station in Suffolk. The agreement over the Sizewell C reactor was authorised a few weeks ago, but there's concern it could tie the next Prime Minister's hands and disrupt any financial plans he or she might have. University bosses are calling for tuition fees to be raised closer to the £24,000 a year average that foreign students pay. They warn the current fee of £9,250 for UK students is forcing them to take on an ever-increasing number of foreign applicants. A record 1 in 5 undergraduates starting at top universities this autumn are from overseas, up by 7% in a year. The police watchdog is investigating Scotland Yard after it emerged police met missing student nurse Awami Davis. Officers spoke to her on July the 6th after being called to an address in Croydon, hours after Essex police were told she'd disappeared. And a guitar used by Foo Fighter star Dave Grohl is going on sale in Wiltshire. It could earn a private collector as much as £30,000 when it's auctioned off next month. Those are the latest news headlines. Still to come, your TalkSport update. But first, the weather.
Times Food and Drink sponsors Talk TV weather.
This afternoon will be dry across a large part of the UK, but a band of cloud and rain will be moving northwards across parts of Wales and western England. Taking a closer look at this evening, and any daytime showers across Scotland should be largely fading away to give a fine end to the weekend with some late sunshine. Northern Ireland and much of northern England will also have a fine evening. However, cloud and rain will begin to move into parts of Lancashire and Greater Manchester. However, the main bulk of the cloud and rain will be across Wales and the North Midlands, with some heavy bursts possible. The rest of Wales and southwest England may see some late brightness, though for many it will be rather grey and damp but humid, while southeast England should be dry with some spells of sunshine. Little changes as we approach midnight, with further rain across parts of Wales and northern and western England.
Times Food and Drink sponsors Talk TV weather.
Hello again. Promoter Eddie Hearn has denied Anthony Joshua could retire after losing his rematch with Alexander Usyk. Usyk retained his heavyweight titles, beating Joshua on a split decision, and an emotional Joshua explained how the defeat had hurt him.
It'll never break me, but it takes real strength for it not to break you. And tonight, there's a little crack in the armour because I took a loss.
Jurgen Klopp has said Liverpool should be awarded 3 points if tomorrow's game at Manchester United is postponed. Protests are expected outside Old Trafford, with many United fans unhappy with the ownership of the club by the Glazer family. In May last year, United fans broke into the ground, forcing the game with Liverpool to be postponed. And Klopp says there can't be a repeat.
People tell us we we are fine, so we go there, we play the game, hopefully, and go home. But if I really think in a situation like this, always the other team should get the points.
And Cameron Norrie has been knocked out of the Cincinnati Masters. The Briton lost to Croatian Borna Coric 6-3, 6-4. Despite this, the world number 11 will be looking to build on an impressive year with the US Open starting on August the 29th. That's all for now. I'll be back with more in half an hour.
I think the topic that I'd like more people to be thinking about is definitely health and social care. You know, we have an outrageous system where we don't look after our elderly in the way we should. We've got to have a proper grown-up and honest conversation about that.
Well, a very good afternoon to you. Peter Cardwell here between now and 1 o'clock, filling in for Richard Tice, who is off on a well-deserved holiday. And then, of course, Tricia Goddard will be here between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock, so we'll be hearing from her a little bit later in terms of what's in her show. In terms of what's coming up in the next hour or so, we're going to talk to Colonel Richard Kemp, the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan, who, in regard to the Ukrainian strikes on Crimea, could the Ukrainian forces actually be winning this war by taking it to Russia's doorstep, essentially? They illegally annexed Crimea in 2014 and been seen as a bit of a haven. So we'll see what happens, what is happening there from Colonel Kemp. Also talking about self-driving cars. Could they be a reality sooner than we think? We'll also be talking to a guest we've spoken to before, Ahmed, who is a translator. He helped the British and American forces a year on from the withdrawal from Afghanistan. What's happening to him and his family? Well, he's still there in Afghanistan, living in fear of his life from the Taliban. We're also going to be talking about the rail strikes, the travel chaos that continues, and how it might be affecting you in the next few days. So stay tuned for all that information in the next hour. Just time to a few people have been very annoyed by my saying that man-made climate change is a thing. And that 99% of the world's scientists agree with me. I agree with the caller, says William, who said Peter Cardwell is an arse when discussing the climate emergency. Thank you for that. Thank you for this one, who says, when will you realise the great climate hoax is nothing but a Ponzi scheme? You scream that it's all about science. Wrong. It's all about money. How much are scientists, companies and investors being paid to continue the hoax? Follow the money. I mean, that's just nonsense. I'm sorry. Thank you very much to everybody else who has been... I respectfully disagree, says Jackie. Thank you, Jackie. Thanks for respectfully disagreeing. The science isn't settled, she says. By its very nature, science evolves. When NASA says that CO2 doesn't cause climate change, it's the Earth's trajectory around the sun. I've read numerous climate scientists that don't agree it's man-made. I'm sure there are numerous people that you've read, Jackie, but they are nonetheless absolutely in the minority. Final one on this. Chris says Peter Cardwell should be sacked for shutting down debate on the science of anthropogenic climate change. This must be debated openly. Net zero is costing us a fortune, and it won't make the slightest difference to the climate. Well, interestingly, Chris, even though you're saying I should be sacked on this, I agree with the final point that you make there, and that net zero is costing us a fortune. It absolutely is, no doubt about that. And it won't make the slightest difference to the climate. I also agree with that. I think the net zero targets are a bit silly, given that we will make huge efforts for our emissions, which are 1% of global emissions. Even if we got those emissions down to zero, I'm not sure, well, I'm not a scientist, but it doesn't look likely that it would make a huge difference if 1% of the emissions were, let's just say, eradicated totally. Not that they would ever be, but there we are. So, Chris, despite the fact you've called for me to be sacked, I nonetheless agree with the latter half of your text. So there we are. That presumably doesn't happen too often. But thank you to everybody who's been in touch, even the people who call for me to be sacked, which I hope that that doesn't happen, obviously, because we've got to keep Jack in dreamies. Anyway, let's talk about a much more serious issue, which is the Ukrainian strikes on Crimea. This is, they're having apparently a major psychological and operational effect on Moscow's forces, according to Western officials who've been talking to journalists. There have been various explosions at various air bases. More than half of the Black Sea's fleet of naval jets have been put out of action. This is really something that is having a major effect on the Russian forces. Crimea is an interesting part of the world as well, because it was illegally annexed by Russia in 2014, seen as a safe place for many people, many Russians and other nationalities going on holiday there as well. Now it's a war zone. Let's talk to a man who knows all about this, Colonel Richard Kemp, who's the former commander of the British forces in Afghanistan. Colonel Kemp, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate your company and your expertise. What is going on here?
Well,
Ukraine has been making a series of strikes against Crimea, but not only Crimea, also beyond the Ukrainian borders in Russia itself, where there's been a series of attacks that are directed towards a nuclear power station near Kharkov. But in terms of Crimea, the most significant attack that's taken place has been on the airbase that you mentioned, where about 9, maybe more or less, Russian warplanes were taken out of action or severely disabled by a Crimean strike. And we've seen other less effective, but nevertheless psychologically important attacks. Of course, the population of Crimea, which I think is predominantly pro-Russian, certainly was, is severely, impacted by this. And they thought they were safe. They thought the war was far away and they wouldn't be affected by it. But they are now becoming, albeit not in terms of loss of civilian life, etc. They are now being affected by it. They're living in greater fear than they were before. And in terms of Russia, the main part of Russia itself, and Moscow, I don't think this is going to have a huge effect. Obviously, they don't like it. Crimea is extremely important to Putin. But nevertheless, there's a huge amount, much worse things going on in the Crimea, in the Ukrainian war, including fairly severe Russian casualties. So I don't think this is going to be a turning point for Russia. I don't think I've heard it suggested that Putin will be considering whether he can sustain operations in Ukraine. I don't think that is in any way true. But nevertheless, it's an effective tactic and a good tactic.
Speaking of the nature, you're saying it's an effective and good tactic. I mean, just develop that a little bit for us, because I wonder just how important the psychological aspect of this is. You're saying it's happened. It's not a massive military thing, but it is nonetheless important psychologically. As a tool of war, as someone who has a huge experience in war theatres, how important is that in terms of perhaps winning or advancing?
Well, I don't think it's important in terms of winning. I think it's just damaging to the enemy. And it may have some, at least small amount of leverage if it comes to negotiations for a settlement between Ukraine and Putin, which I think is looking, maybe not immediately, but is looking potentially likely. And it could give them some degree of leverage there. Probably not significant, but it does have an impact on support among Russian speaking people who support Russia in Ukraine, not just in Crimea, but in wider Ukraine. As I said, I don't think it's going to be psychologically damaging, particularly for Moscow, for the Russian population as a whole, which is still overwhelmingly in support of Putin and his war, certainly outside of Moscow itself, where the people there really, they rely entirely on the information being given to them by the Kremlin rather than a sort of open media, generally speaking. So I think, it's not a dramatic thing, but again, it could take, it would be the strike against the Saki air base was very effective, and you can be lucky or unlucky. You can be lucky in terms of making a major hit and doing major military damage, for example, on a supply base or an ammunition base, which has been the target of some of these attacks, which could prevent, could reduce the effectiveness of Russian fighters in the conflict, perhaps in the war the front that's going on further to the east around Kherson. But also it could possibly affect Russian supplies in Crimea. I don't think we've seen that yet, but it is a potential.
In terms of, you mentioned the media there, the information the Russian people are getting from their government. No doubt here in the UK, Ukraine has fallen out of the news agenda to a huge degree. It used to be we got every single thing that happened there wall to wall on the news. For you as a military man, as someone who has fought for our country in so many different conflicts, how important is it, how frustrating, I suppose, is it to people who are suffering those horrendous abuses at the hands of the forces, how horrendous it is for people in Ukraine? I mean, it must be very dispiriting that the world seems to have moved on to some degree.
Well, I think... I think that is true, and obviously the extent of media coverage does affect international support for Ukraine.
Yes.
And I think it's going to get worse because as we come into the winter, assuming the conflict's still going on, which it shows every signs of being, then we're, with the temperatures dropping dramatically, with snow on the ground, with heavy mud on the ground, probably in November, the conflict will be less easy for troops to manoeuvre around and less easy for them to survive in the open. So I think that is likely to result in a frozen conflict, both in terms of the temperature, but also in terms of the amount of action. And when there isn't much action going on, then the media, again, will lose interest with no major news developments to report. And that's going to coincide with immense pressure in Western Europe in particular on governments to do something about the energy crisis as the weather gets colder and people begin to shiver if they can't afford the fuel and particularly the gas that's coming out of Russia.
Absolutely.
And I think that could potentially undermine Western support for Ukraine, as well as the media dropping off the media spotlight a bit.
Very interesting points there. Thank you very much indeed to Colonel Richard Kemp, the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. Thank you very much indeed for his thoughts there. Sean in Gloucestershire says, hi Peter, great show.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Colonel Kemp. Sean in Gloucestershire says, great show. Regarding net zero, the problem is we are being forced into this without choice, and the direction they are taking is the beta max option. We should be focusing on nuclear and hydrogen. Agree with you, Sean, absolutely. Gary says, Cardi P, would you ask one of your guests who runs and owns our wind farms? Do we pay global prices for the oil that comes from our own seas and the energy that comes from wind farms? If so, any future fracking, solar or wind energy should come from a nationalised company, or we will never have cheap energy. Hydrogen is the way forward. Thank you for that. Jane says, hi Peter, unfortunately whoever becomes PM will not do what they promised. They will just blame events. Still don't understand why the Prime Minister we have already couldn't have just got on with the job. So much time wasted in the past few weeks, says Jane. Ed says, it's very simple, Peter. If you're hell-bent on net zero and love it so much, then you pay the bills that are coming. That goes for everyone. Stop bleating about the energy prices. As I've said, Ed, I don't think the net zero targets are necessarily a good thing. I don't think they're necessarily something that we should be doing. And I think they're very, I think we need to have a proper debate about this. And thankfully we have some of the debate here on Talk TV. So let me just read out a few more text messages before we go to the break. 80s Music Man says, and there it is, Labour bowing to the altar of net zero. We produce about 1% and we'll never get to net zero anyway. It's a fantasy making energy companies a fortune while taking more and more from the taxpayer. I mean, I think that's a perfectly fair point as well. Mark says, can you translate whether Peter Kyle, this was our Labour guest earlier in the earlier in the programme at the very start, can you translate whether Peter Kyle actually supports the Northern Ireland Unionists? He never answered and waffled about making the union work. Labour caused the problem by wasting millions of pounds on creating Scottish and Welsh parliaments. No policies, no ideas. I think he was trying to hedge his bets there a little bit, and he says it's very different to be a unionist about Scotland and about Northern Ireland, and he talked about the fact that there is a degree of impartiality that needs to be done there, and it's interesting. I mean, Labour has had that policy for some time. I think it had it around the time of the Belfast Agreement, whereas the Conservative Party of course is the Conservative and Unionist Party, so it's an interesting debate there. Thank you, Mark, for that. A couple more texts. Hi again, Peter. It says, Leo, my sister will be visiting from Canada in a few months and she'll be bringing a box of these irresistibly delicious biscuits, essentially custard creams infused with maple syrup. I'll send a picture when they come, but don't be surprised if the box is still empty. Leo, I have a Canadian living with me at the moment in my spare room, and she brought me some of those exact biscuits and they lasted about 2 days. So they are, I know exactly the ones you're talking about. Dave, Tech Up Dave, is looking absolutely faced like I've slapped it with a wet kipper, given that I didn't even bring him any of the biscuits. How selfish and horrible I am. Jane says, Peter, hi, chocolate tasting next weekend. What a hard job. We will be watching you enjoy it. Jane, thank you very much indeed for that. Really appreciate your thoughts and indeed the thoughts of everybody else who's been in touch. We're going to talk in just a minute about self-driving cars. Could they be closer than we think? And what are the dangers of those as well? Do stay with us here on Talk TV for that discussion in just a few minutes. Thanks to Phil, who says, I'm very disappointed, Peter, that you've been taken in by the climate scam. I suggest you talk to other Talk TV presenters who have had Brian Catt as a guest. Don't confuse climate and weather. We are on a 100,000-year cycle. P.S. CO2 is essential for life. Yeah, I know that. I'm aware of that. I just think that man-made climate change is a thing, and it's a problem. And I mean, if that makes me unpopular, well, I'm afraid we can hopefully disagree without being disagreeable. And thank you to Phil, actually, for a very nice text. Some of the others calling me, I think it was a lefty establishment arse. That's not very nice. But I mean, you're entitled to your opinion. Thank you so much to everybody who has been in touch, including Les, who says the highly inflammatory IRA had no other option. Comments by the de facto Northern Ireland First Minister or something Mr. Peter Kyle will have to deal with. What is his answer? More Labour plans to split Northern Ireland away from the UK. I really just wanted to know from Peter Kyle, are you a unionist? Do you believe in the union? And he said about trying to make Westminster work and make the union work. So I didn't feel I got a full answer there, but maybe I'll chat to him some other time about that. In terms of Labour's plan, Angela says, I like the plan. I also agree that Parliament should reset this week. I'm fed up with our lives being politicised. Tories just dismissed this plan with no thought for us, the public. Time to change and work together. Thank you also to someone in the Orkney Islands, Mark here in the Orkney Islands. Morning, Peter. Here in the Orkney Islands, we produce around 120% of our own energy, all renewable, wind, solar, tidal. We pay more here than anywhere in the UK. We don't get the benefit of green energy, except the bragging rights of being a green island. We have to switch off turbines if we produce too much, as we can't send it back to the mainland. So green energy equals cheaper bills is not actually applicable here. My goodness. Let's talk about self-drive cars. And already Michael's been in touch to say a member of my family, my wife, believes we already have a self-drive car. Gears and pedals are a complete mystery to her. My goodness, well, I'm not sure Michael's wife would be a huge fan of that. Thanks also to John from Lincolnshire, who says we should concentrate on self-driving trains before worrying about cars. Planes have it. It's called autopilot. And Neil in Worcestershire says, Peter, the first time a driverless car crashes into a bus stops and kills a few a bus stop and kills a few children, the government will flap and ban them, says Neil in Worcester. Well, let's talk to an expert on this. We've got Quentin Wilson, the motoring journalist, with us. Quentin, you're very welcome to Talk TV this afternoon. How are you doing?
Fine, how are you?
I'm very well. I mean, it's interesting that the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, says the first self-driving cars could be on British roads by next year. Do you think that's realistic?
To be frank, no. All the experts I talk to in the autonomous car field say that we're way away from that. I mean, you might have them driving around on campuses, on closed circuit roads, but we're not going to see them, interacting with unconnected cars, probably for the next 5 years or so. But what he's saying is that we really do need to pursue this, as it's a huge benefit to society. If we can crack this, then we can literally save trillions and trillions of dollars and pounds by having cars and vans and HGVs that drive themselves. So it's part of that science and technology push, which as a nation we've really, really got to be doing. So don't get excited, everybody. We're not going to be, banned from driving normal cars or seeing autonomous cars on the roads for a while yet.
Okay. It's interesting in terms of autonomous cars and in terms of what you're saying there in the technology. I mean, I can honestly say if I got into a self-driving car, I would be very nervous. I mean, what if not the car itself, but what if the technology crashes? I mean, what if there's some problem? I mean, there are very few bits of technology that are always 100% reliable, but my iPhone sitting here isn't determining whether I live or die.
Sure. I mean, there's going to be all sorts of problems that we've got to sort out, and people like Google and Waymo and Apple and Tesla haven't cracked it yet. So that learning curve is going to be quite steep. And hey, yes, there will be a time when they are dangerous and people will be wary of getting into them. But then, we were worried about mobile phones being, causing radiation and early cars killing people. You've got to go with this technology and you've got to push it as much as you can. So there'll be this period where you have the connected cars and the unconnected cars together on the same roads, and that's going to be really, really difficult. And I think it's really important to manage people's expectations about this. Absolutely, this is a really, really, really good goal to pursue and to invest in, but don't raise people's expectations thinking they're going to be able to buy one tomorrow, because they're not.
It's interesting. I mean, someone was raising, I was raising a thought on this in terms of this whole idea of the Internet of Things, sort of everything being connected. I mean, are we going to get to a stage, maybe this is just conspiracy theory, maybe this is just crazy, but I mean, presumably if everything's connected, if the driverless cars are there, they'll keep a record of our speeding, for example. And look, there are speed cameras at the moment and so on, but if you're speeding, could you be caught by your driverless car? Could you be sanctioned simply because that information is going back, or am I just kind of getting ahead of myself, Quentin?
If the authorities really wanted to do that, they could do it now, because we've got those black boxes in our cars and in our phones. So, you know, that kind of big brother watching you argument is pretty old hat.
Okay.
And sorry, you were going to say?
No, I just agreeing with you. That's a good point. I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, and we can invent all these barriers to adoption, all these barriers to kind of, you know, vision and ambition, and then nothing happens at all. So I just sort of pause this and say, look, let's try and do this as a nation, because think about all the stuff we could export to the rest of the world. And we have some of the best automotive talent in this country that can do this. And we can probably beat Google, Waymo, Apple, and maybe even Tesla with our Formula One engineers here in the UK. So why not give it a try? Yeah,
there's a lot of talent there, a lot of optimism. Quentin Wilson, car journalist and TV presenter, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Thanks also to Sir Mac, who has been in touch. He says, Peter, as you do a segment on cats and then another segment on biscuits, I have a plan. A segment on cat biscuits. Get a cat in the studio and do a tasting, and then you have to eat them too, along with Tech Up Dave. Tech Up Dave is shaking his head. I am also going to shake my head on this one. It's possibly the logical conclusion of this, but having once eaten a cat biscuit by mistake, I must say, I can honestly say that I'll probably just leave those ones to Jack as well. Lots of people getting in touch about Brian Catt as well, who is very good, according to various people. Why don't we get Brian Catt on the programme next week, and he can convince me why I'm wrong about man-made climate change? I think that's probably a good idea. Why don't we do that? Lots more to talk about, including the US troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. We'll be talking to someone there in a few seconds.
The thing that's really getting up my nose is how many of you moan about the fact that I have an opinion. I've been doing this for over 40 years. Of course I have an opinion. And if you get triggered or you get upset, you shouldn't watch. For the rest of us, an evening of entertainment live on TV and radio. Now, what do you want?
I don't want anything.
Thank you very much indeed.
Top class calls then.
This is Talk TV News.
Good afternoon, I'm Kate Partridge. The first day of an 8-day strike at the UK's biggest container port is underway. Almost 2,000 Unite members at Felixstowe in Suffolk are walking out in a dispute over pay. The union says it will have a big impact, but a port source claims the action will be an inconvenience, not a catastrophe, a point echoed by the CEO of the UK Major Ports Group, Tim Morris.
There will inevitably be an impact from what's happening at Felixstowe. It'll be very interesting to see over the next couple of days whether it translates into being an inconvenience or actually more significant disruption, as it would have done perhaps 2 years ago before we were used to working in this much more flexible way. So a very interesting time for this to be happening.
Barristers are voting on plans for an all-out strike next month. Members of the Criminal Bar Association are being asked to vote on an indefinite, uninterrupted strike that would start on September the 5th. Liz Truss has hinted she'll announce more help for those struggling amid the cost of living crisis. In an interview with The Sun on Sunday, the Foreign Secretary said that every government has to look at making sure life is affordable for people. The favourite to become Prime Minister also hinted at support for small businesses. It's understood that Boris Johnson has given the green light to construction of a £30 billion nuclear power station in Suffolk. The agreement over the Sizewell C reactor was authorised a few weeks ago, but there's concern it could tie the next Prime Minister's hands and disrupt any financial plans he or she may have. And the President of Ukraine has congratulated Alexander Usyk on his victory over British boxer Anthony Joshua, saying it symbolises that Ukrainians won't give up. Usyk won on a split decision after after the pair went the full 12 rounds, retaining his heavyweight titles in Saudi Arabia. That's all for now. More in half an hour.
Thank you so much to everybody who's been in touch on the driverless cars aspect. Well, that's great, isn't it, says one tweeter. Quentin Wilson says self-driving cars, vans and HGVs will save millions of pounds, oh yes, in drivers' wages. This is something people ignore when they say driverless is the future. Yeah, I do worry about all those people who are employed in the transport industry. If we just have driverless vehicles and actually drones as well to deliver parcels and letters and things, well, I mean, what about the people who are postmen? What about the people who are HGV drivers? What about the people who are a driver, taxi drivers and so on? There are a lot of people who rely on actually driving as a job. Thanks also to John O'Keefe, who says, you can tell Quentin Wilson we have plenty of driverless cars on the road right now. No one where I live can drive properly. Well, thank you very much indeed for that indeed as well. And I know that we're going to talk to our friend in Afghanistan. We call him Ahmed, who is going to be on the line in a minute. And he's not just ready just at the moment, but we're going to talk to him. He is in Kabul, and he was a former interpreter for the British and American forces. We're calling him Ahmed because that's not his name. We've obviously got to keep his name. Secret because he is living in fear of his life. And we will hope to speak to him in a second. I think we're having some connection problems, perhaps, with Afghanistan. Oh no, we have him. That's great. Okay, let's talk to Ahmed in Afghanistan. That's not his name, of course. It's very nice to have you on the programme again. Nice to speak to you again.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How are you?
Hello there. Yes, it's. I was just wondering if you could just tell us how things are in Kabul now and how things are in Afghanistan where you're living.
Well, obviously, you know that things in the past 1 year have changed, totally and entirely, because what we see today and what the Taliban authorities are displaying on TV channels are different. You see a different image on the ground here in Afghanistan. What they say is that they have ensured their security, they have did this and that. But what you see inside the skin of the city is...
I'm afraid we seem to be losing the line there. It's just not a stable line. We'll maybe come back on another occasion to speak to him. Apologies for that. It is, of course, the 1 year anniversary of the withdrawal from Afghanistan of British and American forces, and I wanted to talk to him, but sadly the line just isn't good enough. This is, of course, often what happens. We'll see if we can maybe take a call from a listener instead. The number to call, of course, if you want to get your voice on the air is 0344 499 1000. That's what Richard in Kent did. Richard, you're very welcome to Talk TV this afternoon. How are you doing?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Great stuff. What point would you like to make, Richard?
So, net zero. I actually think, well, it would make no difference if we went to net zero in the UK tomorrow. It will make no difference to the world climate. But actually, I think it could make things worse because you will make manufacturing in this country so expensive. It will move to the Far East, to China, which a lot of it has already done, and they're just going to increase their carbon emissions there.
Well, I think you might have a good point, Richard, actually, because actually getting to net zero, I mean, this is a sort of global idea that we got to lead by example and that all countries will follow us and so on. But our emissions are so low, they're at 1%, that, as you correctly say, even if they all ended tomorrow, it would help in a very small way, but it would be tiny, and also the actual path to get there, Richard, is a very expensive one, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, we're just going to, with the current energy costs now, it's going to be impossible for us to carry on manufacturing the way we are, and that's even more that's going to go to China and the Far East.
who are not leading by example in terms of, certainly with China, in terms of their own emissions, and perhaps the conversation needs to be had with them, who emit something like a quarter of the world's emissions, rather than a country that emits about 1%.
Well, that's it, and India as well. They're all perfectly happy to carry on burning coal and making lots. Just the whole thing worse.
Yeah, Richard in Kent, thank you so much for your call. Really appreciate. Very good thoughts on there. He gave us a call on 0344 499 1000. You have, I think, 23 minutes for the rest of the show if you want to talk to me. Peter in Beccles in Suffolk also wants to talk about net zero. Peter, you're very welcome to Talk TV this afternoon. How are you doing?
Fine, and yourself?
Yes, I'm very well, thank you. What point would you like to make?
I mean, they're saying that about net zero. I mean, we're talking a load of rubbish. I mean, we're talking about farmers not ploughing. Well, if you don't plough, you're not going to get sufficient depth for plants to grow.
Why are they saying that we can't plough fields? What's that got to do with net zero?
No, we're saying that it's releasing too much carbon out of the soil.
But surely plants would take in carbon and then put out oxygen.
That's my point.
Yeah, well, I think that's
they're going on about that. Then the thing is, saying, 2050, going to be neutral. That's too late.
Okay, Peter.
I mean, the real problem is overpopulation.
Yeah, I think we've got to squeeze in one more call. Peter, thank you so much for your call. We're going to squeeze in one more call just before the break. Andrew is in Coventry. You're very welcome to Talk TV today, Andrew. What's your point?
No, excuse me, mate. Hey, I want to make a point about what Kyle was saying.
Yeah, this is Peter Kyle, the Labour frontbencher, who's on. Just for people who didn't see it, he was on at the start of the show.
He's dead wrong on both counts. I mean, yes, Labour has a plan, but when you're dealing with an entity like an economy that has feedback loops, you need a strategy. And so their plan would be a disaster. All it would do would be to indebt the country more.
You think it would just bring us more and more into debt?
Yep, and we would continue to use the same amount of energy as we would. What we need to do, and the last thing we need is a bunch of MPs waffling in Parliament for the next 2 weeks. It's exactly right to wait till September 5th, but between now and September 5th, we need to organise basically a coalition government and create an economic czar, office of the economic czar. Put Rishi in there as CFO. He's not destined. He's never going to be destined to be a CEO or a prime minister, but he's a good technocrat. And he's got the contacts in Wall Street, because the way to fix the energy crisis is through some financial engineering. Put Boris in there, and then...
So under your plan, there'd actually be a new role for Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. Well, Andrew, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. That's Andrew in Coventry who gave us a call. Thanks to Ed, who says, Peter, these people make me laugh when you hear these experts saying we can save millions and trillions with self-driving vans and HGVs. They never seem to talk about how much the unemployment this will cause. That's not always the case of moving to other employment. Ash of Haywood in Manchester says, self-driving, just wait until the police have an intervention mode that takes you to jail without pass and go. Or I mean, that's a very point I'm afraid I disagree with. I'm not. Quentin Wilson was saying they have these kind of thoughts now. Wayne and Barry says, I think these driverless cars are a great idea if we get a female Bond. At least for the first half hour, we won't be able to watch the new Bond trying to parallel park. That's a very sexist point and not a clever one, Wayne, but it is kind of funny. So thank you very much indeed for that. We're going to talk about strikes in just a few seconds. Well, it's the final section of the show. It's zipped by. I've had a lovely, lovely weekend doing these two shows. Thank you so much to everybody who has watched, listened, and communicated, either by ringing, calling, or texting. Even the people who said the person who said I was a lefty establishment arse. I think that's up there with when someone called Daisy McAndrew a brain dead reptilian Karen. Which I also enjoyed very much. I mean, these insults, if you're going to insult someone, be creative. That's what I say. Thank you so much to everybody who's been in touch, including Mike, who says, for goodness sake, Peter, net zero just means we import all manufactured products, including wind and solar farm equipment, oil, gas, and millions of other products from our countries, banging out carbon and taking us for the fools we are. It's a carbon trading lie, says Mike. On driverless cars, Jane says, self-service checkouts, an app for everything, closing banks, so much more. This means so many people with no work. What happens then? Very, very good point. Kim Russell says, just you wait, driverless cars will be the Sinclair C5 of the 21st century. People drive themselves because public transport is unreliable and at the mercy of strikers. They also drive because they enjoy it. What happens when driverless cars are hacked? I mean, that's a really interesting point, actually, and one let's just put it to Christian Wolmar, who's a transport commentator. We're going to talk to Christian about the real strikes and the general travel chaos. Christian, you're very welcome to Talk TV this afternoon. How are you doing?
Hi there. I'm afraid I'm next to Main Road, so it might be a little bit difficult. But just a quick word on driverless cars. I've written a book about driverless cars, and, Peter, they just ain't going to happen.
Why not? Why not? Why are they not going to happen?
Because the technology is too difficult. They've been working on this for nigh on 20 years. And what do we have at the moment? A few shuttle buses operating somewhere, the odd taxi in kind of very carefully laid out places in America, but the amount they've spent on this, and they can't get over the fundamental problem that a machine is not as good at spotting danger and spotting kind of the road around them as a human being.
I'm not sure I would. Well, you're absolutely right, and I'm not sure I would trust a driverless car, especially at the start. I'm not sure I'm going to voluntarily get in one because, I mean, a car. I can drive. I'm not anti-car. I'm very pro-car, actually, and most journeys in this country are made by car, and many people really, really enjoy driving cars, and that's great. But they are nonetheless a thing that can kill people, and they sometimes do. And I don't want to take the sort of human reaction and thought process away. I just don't think...
I think another point is I'm at the moment cycling through to some village in Suffolk, and Google Maps got it so badly wrong that Mrs. Google sent me in the wrong direction for about 2 miles.
Been there.
And when you're on a bicycle, that's quite a lot. And these driverless cars are supposed to be dependent on that technology.
No, sat-nav not infallible. Absolutely, or Google or whatever. You're absolutely right. And we've had quite a debate on that today as well. But let's talk about the strikes, because I'm annoyed. Look, loads of people couldn't get to work. Loads of people were deprived of seeing friends, family, medical appointments, all sorts of things. Really, really disappointing. I missed a friend's wedding. I know that's not the world's biggest thing, but he's a good mate, and I really wanted to wish him and his new wife well, and that really annoyed me because I couldn't get there. I'm sure everybody, or many people, have a tale to tell if they regularly use trains in London here as well. The Underground was off on Friday, but that doesn't affect most of our listeners, but it did affect millions of people in our capital city. What is going on? Are we just going to have more of these strikes? Is there any progress at all in any of these negotiations? When is Mick Lynch going to sort of be satisfied, I suppose?
Well, there is one good kind of sign, which is that there isn't an announcement of any more dates.
Good.
And one hopes that there'll be some negotiations. But I must say, it is down to the government, Peter. I mean, it really is. And the fact that Grant Shapps not only refuses to get involved, but then winds people up with kind of saying there's going to be agency workers, there's going to be driverless trains and all this stuff, isn't helpful. And we really need a new transport secretary, who hopefully will get one by about September the 6th or 7th, who will be prepared to roll up their sleeves and say, OK, I understand the union's anger. I also understand the financial constraints the government is under. How about this, and this?
So, like so many things, including the cost of living crisis, are we just in a holding pattern on this till the next Prime Minister and probably her government takes over?
Oh, absolutely. And the trouble is, I'm worried that, if it is Liz Truss or indeed it's Rishi Sunak, I think either of them might take the same kind of hostile stance. Look, this isn't union militants, right? You know, I'm a bit of a lefty arse as well. And
are you a lefty establishment arse? That's the question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm establishment.
As long as you're not a brain dead reptilian Karen, that would.
No, I'm not that. But, you know, I have sympathy with the unions, but I also have criticism of the unions. I mean, I do think that, you know, they have to be prepared to negotiate, and they're not going to get 10 or 12%, and they know that.
Yeah.
If they got a half-decent offer, and crucially, they got the promise of no compulsory redundancies. Nobody's saying that they're not going to be jobs that aren't going, but no compulsory redundancies. I think we'd be able to move on.
Yeah. I have a question here from Gary, who has got in touch and says, Cardi P, regarding strikes, don't train drivers, etc., work for private companies? If so, why is the government negotiating pay rises? Does that mean our taxes will pay for these rises? Christian, what do you make of that?
Well, it's because the train operating companies really are now shell companies. They don't collect the fares and keep the fares any longer. That all goes straight through to government. So all the finances of the train operators are dependent on government, and it will be down to the government to agree to any pay rises, both for ASLEF, the train drivers, or for other RMT members who work for the railways.
It's interesting just in terms of the strikes here. We're talking about not just transport strikes, but other strikes as well throughout the country and so on. I mean, it appears certainly, I mean, Mick Lynch absolutely is a very good commentator. He can handle any interviewer. He was interviewed by Jeremy Kyle this week, which I thought was actually a really good interview on Talk TV. And Jeremy is filling in for Piers Morgan for another 2 weeks on Talk TV. His show is between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. It's Piers Morgan Uncensored, but Jeremy Kyle is sitting in for Piers this month. I wonder, in terms of Mick Lynch, I mean, at what point do you think public opinion kind of tips against the strikers and actually says, hold on a second, we need to get to work, we need to do what we're doing here? And I mean, for some people it will have already, it certainly has in my case, but at what point do the strikers listen to the public rather than to their members themselves, or do they at all, Christian?
Well, I think we're living in a very unusual situation because, you know, everybody is impacted by the cost of living crisis. And I think a lot of people look at the unions and say, oh, you know, the rail unions say, lucky them, they're able to go on strike and have an impact. You know, I wish I could. And I think that they do recognise, a lot of people recognise that it's really down to government to sort this out. So if you remember, you know, far too young for this, but, you know, in 1978-9, there was the Winter of Discontent. And it was about dustbin workers, and it was about local authority workers, and bodies were going unburied and stuff. And actually, they blamed the government.
Yeah.
They didn't really blame the trade unions. And the government got a pasting, and it was a Labour government, and we ended up with Mrs. Thatcher. And so I do think there's a bit of the same feeling at the moment, that people see this as a government responsibility.
Yeah. Who runs Britain, they asked. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed for that. That's Christian Woolmer, who's a transport commentator on his bike. So thank you very much indeed to him. Thanks also to Jane, who's been in touch. She says, another great show today, Peter. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Jane. Very kind of you. Barry in North Yorkshire says, fantastic show. Brilliant, Peter. Let's have more on a regular slot. Barry, that's very kind. I do have a regular slot. It's Saturday between 10 and 1. So this exact slot, just a day earlier. And then, of course, Richard Tice will be back next Sunday as well. But coming up in just a few minutes is Trisha Goddard, who is standing by. Trisha, it's really nice to see you again 2 days in a row. What a treat.
I know, it's great. Nice to see you, you lefty. What?
Lefty establishment arse. I mean, the fact that I quite literally worked for the Conservative government and was a member of the Conservative Party while I did so for 3.5 years, apparently I'm still a lefty establishment arse. So there we are.
Well, I just think it's rude that you're not called a Mr. Lefty Establishment.
Well, yeah, I think they should be more formal in their insults, Trisha.
Esquire.
Yeah, definitely. Esquire, yes.
Esquire.
Definitely.
Esquire,
Daisy McAndrew
I'm sure I get called.
Daisy McAndrew was called a brain-dead reptilian Karen.
Really?
Yeah, I thought that was quite a good one.
That segues for... I think that's quite good. It quite nicely segues into what I'm going to be covering, because we're going to be talking about dinosaur bones. Apparently, they're being sold for millions and millions and millions.
Wow.
Dinosaur Karens that are being sold for millions, which means we don't get to see them in museums, although I'm sure we can see Daisy McAndrew otherwise.
She wouldn't be in a museum. She's too young.
Way too young, way too young, more likely to be me. We've got our faith in, we are our faith panel. What we do is look at the news through the eyes of different faiths, and that's become really popular, so we're doing that again. We have Doctor in the House, where we look at the health news throughout the week. We also look at mental health issues. We're going to be looking at anxieties. Jonah Hill has just done a documentary on his anxiety and says he won't be publicising it because he makes him too anxious. A lot of people suffer from anxiety, especially after lockdown, so we'll be covering that. All your answers, questions. Look at our person of the week, who's Mr. Pothole. Chap called Mr. Pothole, who's actually taking on Britain's councils and getting them to fill in potholes really successfully. So all that and a lot more.
Sounds wonderful, Tricia. I hope you have a great show between 1 and 4. That's Tricia Goddard, who's on just after the news there. Really interesting. I wonder what happens if you sell a dinosaur bone and then aren't happy with the process. Do you have a bone of contention with that one? Sorry about that. You got through quite a lot of this show without a pun. So thanks to Tricia. Thank you. Thanks also to the top team behind the glass who have been putting this show together. Who've been brilliant. Aaron Gonzalez was the producer along with John Chambers. Also Tech Up Dave Rhodes. Thank you very much indeed to him. Was the Tech Up, obviously, as the name would suggest. Musique La Vontel was the assistant producer. Gareth Cowling was, I'm not sure what he did, but he was certainly involved. Robbie Hawkins on social was there as well. Gareth did vision, I'm afraid. And Isabel Blench did visuals as well. So lots of people involved, all wonderful people who were very, very kind and helped me put the show together today. I'm back during the week as well, obviously doing the political coverage. I wonder what will happen politically this week. Obviously, we're into the last 2.5 weeks of the contest for the Conservative leadership election. We also have Labour calling for Parliament to be recalled. I don't think